Once an elite special forces soldier, he unexpectedly found himself transported back to primitive society, reborn as a 10-year-old primitive child. Here, not only did he face starvation multiple times a day, but he didn't even have a pair of pants to his name. Yet, he remained completely unfazed. With the knowledge from his past life, thriving in this primitive world would be a piece of cake. At that moment, several women draped in animal skins stared curiously at the unlucky child, who seemed about to harm himself. Ignoring them, he picked up a stone knife and sliced open the snake-bitten ankle. Then, he pressed a red-hot branch into the wound. After an agonizing scream, he collapsed, exhausted, hoping his past life instructor hadn't lied, that high heat could destroy snake venom proteins. After a night of life and death struggle, the next day he bounced back like a resilient cockroach. Grabbing a piece of dried meat from a woman, he wolfed it down hungrily. Seeing that he could eat again, the woman chattered excitedly and gestured to the others, preparing to head out. He quickly stopped her, frantically gesturing for more food. Of course, her response was a firm refusal. In this small tribe of just over 50 people, daily food supplies were limited. With winter approaching, it was the season to stockpile, and food was prioritized for the able-bodied adults. In times of scarcity, the first to be abandoned were the injured, like him. Realizing this, he could no longer stay calm. As the weather grew colder day by day, he knew he had to find a way to store food for winter and fast. After careful thought, he concluded that the easiest source of meat was fish. Less than a kilometer away, there was a small river. But the tribe didn't eat fish, and naturally they had no fishing tools. All he had was the stone knife he'd used to cut his wound and a 3 to 4 meter long snakeskin, from the very snake that had bitten him the day before. Cursing under his breath, he set off to gather equipment, planning to weave baskets from vines to catch fish. Given the pristine ecosystem and the fact that no one had ever fished there, the river should be teeming with fish. Soon, he returned to the cave entrance with a large bundle of vines and began crafting a basket. A few children gathered around, watching him curiously, babbling incoherently. Nearby, several women were drying straw, their future beds and blankets for winter. Suddenly, panicked screams echoed from a distance. Looking toward the sound, he saw the bearded chief and 2 other men at the edge of the forest to the west, each clutching a giant egg, running and shouting wildly. Following them was a terrifying, over 3-meter-tall terror bird, emitting sharp screeches. He yelled, "Throw the eggs! Now!" But no one understood. The chief refused to let go of the eggs, and the terror bird refused to give up on him. In no time, the bird caught up, delivering a fatal blow. The chief was dead on the spot. The 2 men who had been fleeing quickly tossed their eggs and scrambled up trees at the forest's edge, narrowly escaping. But the children around him, too young to have ever joined a hunt, had never witnessed such a horrifying scene. They screamed in terror. Having lost its primary target, the terror bird was drawn by the children's cries. It instantly changed direction, charging toward the cave. The women inside hurriedly pulled the children, including him, into the cave and began rolling a spherical boulder to block the entrance. Just as the gap narrowed to 30 centimeters, a massive bird's beak squeezed through the crack at the cave entrance, but the opening was too narrow for its body to follow. At least they were safe now. Even so, the children were wailing in terror. You immediately roared at them, "Shut up, all of you! Whoever keeps crying gets thrown out." Though the children didn't understand your words, your fierce expression frightened them into instant silence. The bird failed to break through the stone barrier, let out a few harsh cries, and eventually turned away from the cave. Seeing this, you quietly moved to the entrance and peered through the crack. The clearing outside was empty, but the bird hadn't left. It had wandered over to the chieftain's corpse and begun feeding on it. Gritting your teeth, you decided this bird had to be eliminated. Having now tasted human flesh and learned your tribe's scent, it would surely return to haunt your people. But you were unarmed. Facing it with a wooden club would be suicide. Then your eyes fell upon the bird's long legs, and an idea sparked. You immediately got to work. First, you gathered 2 fist-sized stones and cut a strip of snakeskin from your waist wrap. Tying a stone to each end, you fashioned a bolus. Finished, you gripped the central cord and slipped through the cave opening. Everyone inside stared in shock, wanting to pull you back but fearing they'd attract the bird's attention again. They could only watch anxiously from the sidelines. Crouching low, you crept through the bushes until you were about 500 or 600 meters from the bird, then halted. Oblivious in its feast, the bird remained unaware that a legendary hunter, once the terror of enemies, had set sights on it. Suddenly, you rose silently, grasping the bolus by its midpoint. Whirling it rapidly overhead, the stone spun out, stretching the cords taut with centrifugal force. The bird noticed the movement, lifted its head, and charged toward you with a screech. As it drew nearer, the women and children at the cave entrance screamed for you to flee. But you stood firm, steady as an old hound. When the bird closed within 30 meters, you hurled the bolus straight at it. The onlookers at the cave gaped, jaws dropped in disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. You quickly signaled 2 companions to pin the bird's neck while you hefted a large rock and smashed it down on its head. Blood spurted like an arrow, and the bird's struggles weakened. Spurred by the sight of blood, your companions also grabbed stones and pummeled its skull. After several heavy thuds, the bird lay still. Your 2 companions looked at you with awe, speechless. You untied the snakeskin from the bird's legs and retied it around your waist, then gestured for them to help carry the bird back to the cave. Obediently, they fell in step like loyal followers. The 3 of you dragged the bird by its legs toward the cave. Seeing the trio returning with such a huge catch, the rest of the cave dwellers couldn't stay put. They cheered and shifted the boulder aside, rushing out to assist. Even the 2 adult men hiding in a distant tree climbed down. They had witnessed your solo hunt from start to finish and were deeply impressed. This was, after all, an unprecedented feat in their tribe's history. First time catching such a large prey back in the cave, you told the women to keep the feathers for themselves and let them handle the rest as they saw fit. Now that the danger had passed, you resumed weaving your baskets. In about an hour, 2 baskets were completed. You filled the baskets with some of the bird's entrails and headed toward the river. Along the way, a woman noticed you going to the river alone and decided to follow. In her heart, she believed you were remarkable, so she felt it was her duty to keep an eye on you. The 2 boys who had just acknowledged you as their leader, seeing you heading out with another strange object, immediately rushed to catch up. The group of 4 soon reached the riverbank. You stood there, carefully observing the water for a while, but the more you looked, the more alarmed you became. In just a few minutes, you witnessed several instances of larger fish preying on smaller ones. There were actually carnivorous fish in this river. Still, you had to admit the ecological environment here was truly pristine. The river water was so clear you could see straight to the bottom, and the fish had chosen their spots well. You tossed some of the bird's entrails into the basket, then gripped the straw rope attached to it and lowered it into the river. The scent of meat quickly spread through the water, stirring up the fish within a 20-meter radius. They swam rapidly toward you, swarming into the basket and scrambling for the entrails. With a sharp tug, you hauled the basket out of the water. Aside from those that escaped, for large fish remained inside. The fish in the river, far from fleeing, gathered in a frenzy below, still fighting over the entrails. It instantly reminded you of feeding koi in a park, and you couldn't help but laugh excitedly. These fish clearly had never encountered such a trick. They couldn't even recognize such a simple trap. Your 2 young companions and the adult woman were astonished. Placing that strange object in the water and pulling it up could actually catch those legless creatures from the river. But what was the point of catching them? They still didn't understand. You dumped the 4 fish onto the ground, carefully cleaned them, then sliced off a piece of sashimi and ate it. Watching you chew the raw fish with relish, they immediately realized it was edible and mimicked your actions, cutting slices to taste for themselves. The woman's eyes lit up instantly. She quickly grasped that this was a new food source and began chattering excitedly, urging you to teach her how to catch fish. But you didn't assign her that task. Instead, you turned and gave assignments to the 3 of them. The woman and 1 child were to clean the fish, while the other child would coat the cleaned fish in grass pulp and hang them on sticks to carry back later. You, meanwhile, continued fishing. With all the fish now gathered in one area, you simply crouched by the bank with your basket. Each dip yielded a substantial catch. The 4 of you worked through the afternoon, and by the end you had caught over 200 fish, the largest weighing around 10 pounds. The 3 of them couldn't possibly carry them all back, so you sent 1 child to fetch some older children for help. Eventually, the group returned to the cave, some carrying poles, others hoisting loads, marching triumphantly. By then, the foraging and hunting parties had already returned. Lacking proper tools, the adults had only managed to catch small prey like rabbits and pheasants. Just as they settled in, the children arrived with the fish, whooping and cheering as they proudly displayed the day's haul to the adults. The tribe had been mourning the chieftain's death, but at the sight of your incredible catch, their spirits lifted instantly. The tragedy was momentarily forgotten. After tallying the day's bounty, all the tribespeople gathered outside the cave. A large pile of firewood was stacked in the clearing before the entrance, and atop it lay the chieftain's body. An old man with 2 goat horns on his head lit the pile of firewood. The roaring flames quickly engulfed the chieftain's body, the firelight reflecting on everyone's faces. The children, smelling the scent of roasted meat, swallowed their saliva. They showed no trace of sorrow. The adults, too, remained calm, as they now had a new source of food. Meanwhile, you took the opportunity to observe the tribe. The tribe currently consisted of 52 people, 8 adult men, 15 adult women, and the rest were children of various ages. The one who had just lit the fire was the tribe's elder. Because he looked the oldest, he was regarded as the wisest, though now he might have to take second place, as you were gradually replacing his standing in everyone's hearts. There was also a man with 6 fingers on his hand, whose preferred weapon was a wooden club. Likely due to inbreeding, he didn't seem particularly intelligent. Beside 6 fingers was a man wearing a feather necklace around his neck. He appeared quite fierce and, like 6 fingers, favored using a wooden club. Behind feather necklace was Stone, who wore a bone necklace. His weapon of choice was, unsurprisingly, stones. A bit farther from them was a 15-year-old youth with only 1 eye and 4 scars on his left cheek. His weapon was a sharpened, straight thigh bone fashioned into a spear. Next to him was 17-year-old Beast Tooth, whose father had been the chieftain 2 generations ago. The weapons he wielded were 2 saber-toothed tiger fangs, each over a foot long. Then there was the tribe's strongest man, mighty, robust, and powerful. His weapon was simple and brutal, a large club. Lastly, there was the cripple leaning on a tombstaff. Nowadays, he followed the gathering team every day, responsible for clearing paths and keeping watch. He also enjoyed polishing stone tools, and it was said his greatest ambition was to carve a burial urn within his lifetime. Overall, among all of them, only Beasttooth and Mighty could be considered the tribe's top fighters. By the time the chieftain's body had finished burning, the sky had turned completely dark. Led by the elder, everyone entered the cave to distribute the food. Since no one had ever eaten fish before, they entrusted you with the task today. You took a pre-roasted fish and demonstrated how to eat it, picking out the bones. Everyone imitated you earnestly, eating with great relish. Perhaps because it was their first time feeling full, they grew happier as they ate and even began dancing while they feasted. The scene before you suddenly gave you a sense of home. Silently, you vowed to lead the tribe toward a better life. After everyone had finished eating, the goat-horned elder took a burnt charcoal stick and recorded your riverside fishing scene on the cave wall. Meanwhile, you taught the women how to weave baskets, adding 2 straw ropes to modify them into backpacks. From then on, they would no longer need to use animal skins for carrying, thereby improving their gathering efficiency. The women took an immediate liking to the baskets, taking turns trying them on and reluctant to put them down. In the end, they agreed to gather vines the next day to make their own. To express their gratitude, they selected 2 deer hides from the gathering team and placed them in your hands. From that day on, you became the first child in the tribe to wear animal skins. But you weren't stingy, you kept one for yourself and gave the other to the mothers of several 2- or 3-year-old children, so they could make clothes for their little ones. After all, children had weaker immune systems, and in primitive society where medical knowledge was non-existent, even a minor cold or fever could be fatal. So, in a way, that piece of deer hide was as good as saving a life. You believed that if you ever needed their help in the future, they would not turn their backs on you. The next day, you woke up very early. After a simple set of military-style exercises, you felt your mouth parched and tongue dry. However, staring at the stone basin of communal drinking water, you still couldn't bring yourself to take a sip. It seemed it was time to craft some water containers. Soon, the tribespeople chattered their way out of the cave, but today they weren't rushing off to hunt. The elder gathered all the adult men in the clearing at the cave entrance, holding the green feather that symbolized the chieftain, clearly intending to select a new leader. You paid them no mind and turned toward the river. Since you weren't considered an adult yet, you had no right to participate in this democratic election. Unexpectedly, after just 2 steps, Doer started hollering while dragging you toward the elder's gathering. Just as you stood there bewildered, the elder began gesturing and speaking. Apparently, your capabilities had gained the tribe's recognition. They wanted you to join the chieftain election. Naturally, you wouldn't pass up this opportunity. Only by becoming chieftain could you command everyone. The The selection process was straightforward and brutal. No weapons allowed, no need to seriously injure opponents, the strongest would become the next leader. Soon enough, Doer, Beast Tooth, and Great Strength emerged victorious to face each other in the final competition. Knowing your physical limitations, you didn't step forward to challenge first. The initial match pitted Doer against Beast Tooth. They traded blows with crude punches and kicks, displaying little finesse in what became primarily a contest of raw power. Though Doer lacked endurance, he possessed explosive strength. Soon he found an opening, launching through the air to pin Beast Tooth beneath him. After several failed attempts to rise, Beast Tooth lay panting heavily, forced to concede defeat. Doer gazed at the green feather in the elder's hand, unable to contain an excited shout, both celebrating victory and challenging Great Strength. Great Strength immediately stepped forward. Standing at 190 centimeters tall, he resembled an iron tower. Doer momentarily seemed unsure how to approach him, but didn't back down, instead roaring as he launched the first attack. Yet upon reaching Great Strength, those shovel-like hands instantly seized his shoulders. Before Doer could react, a thunderous roar filled his ears. Then he went flying several meters before crashing to the ground, unable to rise for quite some time. Great Strength triumphantly beat his chest and turned to accept the feather from the elder. The tribe cheered excitedly, voicing approval for their new chieftain. Just then, a dissenting voice rang out, "Not so fast! You've forgotten me in this leadership contest." As Great Strength reached for the feather to become the new tribal chief, you strode forward in 3 quick steps, snatching the feather from his grasp. Several plumes drifted loose, settling on the ground. Great Strength fumed, chest heaving with an enraged roar. But you didn't flinch, instead tightening your grip on the feather and announcing in the tribe's limited dialect, "I defeat him, I become chief." The spectators immediately erupted, everyone shouting though their meaning was unclear, yet nobody appeared to object. Thus, under the tribe's astonished gaze, you and Great Strength moved to the center. Great Strength looked down at you from his full height, eyes filled with confidence and disdain. The onlookers howled their encouragement. Without hesitation, you charged forward, left foot planting on Great Strength's slightly bent thigh as you launched upward, driving your right knee hard into his chin. Before anyone realized what happened, Great Strength collapsed straight to the ground. The sound of rolling on the ground left and right. The tribespeople present were instantly stunned. You must know, Dali was the strongest warrior in their tribe. Even if he lost, it shouldn't have been this badly, and his opponent was just an underage child. Old Tang suddenly became very agitated. A baseless yet intense feeling arose in his heart. The entire tribe might grow stronger and stronger because of this child before him. Before he could even give an order, you were already lifted high by all the tribespeople and tossed into the air, celebrating the birth of the new chieftain. In just 2 short days, you had brought too many miracles to the tribe. In truth, this outcome was also what everyone had hoped for. Just then, the elder picked up the feather crown that you had just torn apart, looking at you somewhat at a loss. The chieftain's crown, passed down through who knows how many generations, had been destroyed just like that. What about the image of the new chieftain? But he had no idea that you had deliberately broken the feather crown. Joking aside, having a circle of green feathers on your head was absolutely out of the question. By now, Dali had recovered. He was clearly still unwilling to accept defeat. Amid the gasps of the crowd, he quickly charged at you. Seeing this, you immediately rolled off the platform. As he rushed in front of you, you grabbed 2 of his fingers with a backhand grip, yanked them forward forcefully, then sidestepped to get behind Dali. With a fierce kick to his back, Dali fell flat on the ground. The more he struggled, the more pain he felt. In less than 2 minutes, even a tough man like Dali had to beg for mercy, tears and snot streaming down his face. Only then did you clap your hands and release this sobbing, foolish big brother. Then you turned and entered the cave. At this, the crowd erupted in excitement again. The children cheered, celebrating the first time a minor had defeated an adult. The women discussed where they had seen vines, planning to ask the chieftain to teach them how to weave a few more that evening. Elder Bale stared at the cave with a complicated gaze, lost in thought. Just at that moment, you emerged before everyone once again, sporting a brand new look. You wore a simple deerskin, your jet-black long hair tied up with a snakeskin strap. You looked clean, refreshed, yet still sharp and capable. This was the new image you had settled on after much consideration. It was said that this style of attire dated back to the Shang and Zhou dynasties. Early farmers, finding their loose hair inconvenient for farming, began tying it up. This became one of the important symbols of the Han people, who were primarily agricultural. Under the starry-eyed gazes of the tribespeople, you walked into the crowd and began assigning the day's tasks. First, you reorganized the gathering team. The tribe now had 15 adult women in total, 6 of whom were heavily pregnant. The remaining 9 plus the lame man made 10 people. However, today you only sent 8 women to gather. Now that they had baskets, they didn't need the lame man to protect them. Each carrying a stick for self-defense was sufficient. The 6 pregnant women stayed behind to guard the home and look after the 2 or 3-year-old toddlers. The older children were sent to pull weeds. The remaining woman took 2 boys to the river to catch fish. Now everyone had something to do, but the lame man hadn't been assigned a task. He seemed somewhat dejected because of this. For this man who had sworn to spend his life grinding out a stone basin, you planned to put him in charge of firing pottery. But firing pottery wasn't that simple. It required a lot of preparation. So, for now, you had to assign him other tasks. The fish caught yesterday hadn't been dried yet. In this weather, without salt, they would rot quickly. After smoking, they could be preserved for years without spoiling. So, you demonstrated the process to the lame man and left it all to him. Then, turning around, you found a flat area in front of the cave and started digging a pit to build a kiln. The entire kiln is divided into 3 levels. The bottom layer was used for ash removal and air intake. The middle layer was for adding firewood and burning. The top layer was where the pottery was placed. It took a full 3 to 4 hours. Finally, the kiln was completed. But Shur's kiln was unusable. So, I called the 2 companions who had caught fish yesterday. We placed firewood in every layer and lit it. By afternoon, it should be ready to use. After arranging all the work, I personally went to the riverbank to select clay. I found a smooth, flat, large pebble to use as a workbench. I pounded and kneaded the dug-up clay, first shaping it into a round base and then rolling it into coils. The clay coils were layered and attached to the base, then shaped. Finally, I smoothed out the seams. Soon, the first semi-finished product was completed, a small water jar with a narrow base and a wide mouth. Following the same method, I made 4 more in a row. All of them were placed by the cave to dry. I asked the companions tending the fire to keep an eye on them and not let anyone disturb them. Next, I made several double-handled clay pots, dozens of pottery bowls, and some small utensils. These items didn't need to be beautiful, they just had to be practical. At this point, I wasn't entirely confident. How many of these would turn out as usable finished products after firing? When about half the afternoon had passed, I placed all the semi-finished pieces into the fruit kiln one by one. The 2 companions and the lame man stood nearby, watching intently. The new leader had made so many clay pots in just one day. The lame man, in particular, was conflicted. He hoped the clay pots would work, but also hoped they wouldn't. Otherwise, all the years he had spent grinding stone pots would have been wasted. I paid them no mind. Sitting by the fire pit, I added enough firewood and continuously fanned the flames with an animal hide. This continued until evening, when the tribespeople who had been out returned to burrow one after another. The women had a bountiful harvest. Their baskets were filled with wild fruits and large bundles of vines, likely intended for weaving more baskets. The men also had a plentiful haul today. 2 large birds that looked similar to turkeys, some bird eggs, and a few groundhogs. Combined with the over 100 fish caught today, the tribe's overall harvest was quite substantial. All the food that couldn't be eaten that day could now be stored. With the pregnant women nearing their due dates, they would have ample food when the time came. Looking through the kiln's observation port, the pottery above had started to turn pale. I felt it was about time, so I let the flames inside die down naturally, planning to let the pottery cool overnight. By tomorrow morning, the kiln could be opened. After a day of labor, the tribespeople were exhausted, but as they gathered around the bonfire, each face was lit with a happy smile. Now, they no longer had to go hungry. Most importantly, I had prepared the 2 large birds as beggar's chicken, a dish they had never tasted before, so delicious. Yet, I had little appetite as the food was only lightly sprinkled with coarse salt, barely enough to taste any saltiness. Coarse salt was precious now, reportedly obtained through trade with another tribe. I quietly pondered whether I could exchange some pottery for more salt. After everyone had finished eating, the women returned to the cave and began weaving excitedly. They had discovered that the baskets were indeed very useful. Even with fewer people in the gathering team today, the harvest was greater. As for me, I distributed all the animal hides. Now, even if the children had to squeeze together, they could all have blankets to cover themselves. The next morning, upon waking, I immediately went to check on the fired pottery. Xuezi hurriedly brought the elder over, chattering excitedly to him about something. They seemed quite anxious, and honestly, I was just as nervous. After all, my grand plan for pottery and the meat stew I had been dreaming of. These past few days, I had grown tired of the dry, roasted meat. With the excitement of cracking a golden egg, you lifted the earthen lid of the kiln and peered inside. All the pottery bowls glowed with a vibrant reddish-brown hue, their surfaces showing signs of melting due to the high temperature, yet they seemed to shimmer with an unexpected, almost magical, radiance. Seeing this, the lame man snatched one of the bowls, excitedly running his hands over it again and again. Then, he threw aside the crutch he always relied on and stumbled his way back to the cave. Before long, he came running back, holding a bowl of water and shouting with joy, proudly showing off this beautiful container that could hold water to the tribe. You smiled and continued to unload the pottery from the kiln. 4 clay pots and 4 small water jars had been fired successfully, their surfaces smooth and free of cracks. Of the 8 spoons, only 2 were usable, the rest had melted and fused together. Out of more than 20 bowls, only 12 were intact. One by one, the reddish-brown pottery emerged from the kiln, filling the tribe with both awe and excitement. Ya and Dali, being the quickest to act, grabbed a jar each and ran toward the river, returning soon with 2 jars full of water. The elder, though excited, remained composed, gesturing and asking how this was done. Before you could answer, the 2 companions who had helped yesterday eagerly explained to him that it was made from clay. But what concerned you most was whether it could be traded for salt. You gestured to the elder, expressing this question. To your surprise, the elder looked at you as if you were a spendthrift, pointing at the pottery of various sizes and then at the adults and children of the tribe, using the local dialect to emphatically explain just how precious these items were. Once you understood, you were utterly shocked. Even a single bowl could be traded for a nearly grown boy or 2 girls, let alone the water jars and clay pots. In the various tribes nowadays, containers for holding water were extremely scarce. It was common for someone to spend a lifetime carving a single stone basin. To acquire more containers, some tribes would not hesitate to trade people for them. They believed that a larger population was useless and would only consume more food. But you didn't see it that way. More people could gather more food and also increase the tribe's combat strength. New members joining the tribe would infuse it with fresh blood, at the very least reducing the likelihood of children like 6 fingers being born. With this in mind, you immediately assigned the trading tasks. The elder and the 7-member hunting team were all dispatched, carrying a water jar, a clay pot, and 3 pottery bowls in their baskets to trade for people and salt. The water jar was to be exchanged for 2 adult women, the clay pot for 2 nearly grown boys, and the 3 pottery bowls for salt. If salt was unavailable, the bowls were to be traded for girls. With these instructions, the group set off at once. As for you, you continued to assign the day's tasks to the rest of the tribe. The trade was conducted with a tribe to the west. After crossing a mountain and traversing a ridge, the group quickly reached their destination. This tribe was slightly larger than your Han tribe with a population of about 80 to 90 people. The 2 tribes had frequently exchanged goods before. As soon as the elder and his group arrived with their trade items, the other tribe's leader, Xianxia, immediately came out to greet them. After a brief exchange, the elder took a pottery bowl from his basket and handed it over, offering to trade it for salt. Xianxia's eyes lit up at once. The bowl was smooth inside and out and much lighter than the stone basins his tribe used. He immediately sent 2 tribesmen to fetch a small bundle of salt and handed it to the elder. But the elder shook his head after glancing at the bag. We want more. And this time, we also want to trade for 2 adult women. With that, he signaled Dali to bring out the water jar. Xianxia was stunned. This stone basin was enormous. In the future, it could store more water. But the next moment, he hesitated. 2 women for 1. Such a large stone basin was indeed a great deal. However, it was currently autumn, the season for gathering food. 1 less person would mean a smaller harvest. Yet, in the end, he smiled and agreed. Wouldn't having fewer people reduce consumption as well? Not long after this blood exchange, 2 thin, naked women were brought over. They were a pair of adult sisters. The older sister was holding a 4-year-old boy, also naked. The little boy lay motionless with his eyes closed, clearly ill. We'll trade these two for your large stone basin. The little boy is yours as well. Baldy waved his hand disdainfully, as if urging the two women to leave quickly. The elder looked at the frail women but said nothing. He then had Stone bring out the pottery bowl he was carrying and the remaining pottery bowls. If you want, you can trade the boy for them. Chief Baldy had just acquired the large basin, and though he liked the smaller pottery, he still waved his hand to decline the trade. Seeing this, the elder had no choice but to demonstrate the method the new chief had taught him that morning. He used the pottery bowl to cook a pot of meat soup. Soon, a rich aroma of meat wafted from the pot. The other tribe's people immediately began salivating uncontrollably. So this was how meat could be eaten. Chief Baldy eagerly took the pottery bowl from the elder's hands. It was filled with a few pieces of stewed meat and broth. Hesitantly, Baldy took a sip and was instantly astonished. My heavens! This is incredibly delicious. The savory broth was topped with a beautiful layer of oil, and the tender, juicy stewed meat brought immense comfort with just one bite. What's a few children? We'll trade, we must trade. At that moment, Baldy finally became generous and readily handed over the people. He also had his underlings bring out a large bundle of preserved food, filling Stone's backpack to the brim. Satisfied, the elder nodded. Soon after, the group set off on their return journey. They had come as a party of 7, and with the 9 people they had acquired, they now numbered 16 on the way back. This harvest was far greater than a day of hunting. The group hurried along and finally returned to the Han tribe as evening approached. But as soon as the newly acquired people stepped onto the open ground in front of the cave, they were stunned by the sight before them. At the cave entrance stood 4 newly fired water jars, 4 pots, and a large stack of bowls, all made by the cripple that day. The cripple stood there, grinning foolishly at his creations. It was the happiest day of his life. On another patch of open ground, hundreds of large fish hung together, drying in the wind. The women nearby were all laughing cheerfully. All of this was meat. Now they too could obtain meat for food. Especially for those who had just been traded, both adults and children were dumbfounded. To think that a single stone basin could be exchanged for 2 adults, yet this tribe had so much more. They could trade for everyone in their own tribe. And all that hanging meat, it must all be edible. It seemed like joining this tribe wouldn't be so bad after all. The elder brought the people to report to you. 8 naked individuals plus 1 naked child. You narrowed your eyes and walked past each of them one by one. They were all skinny and bony, clearly malnourished. But it didn't matter. The tribe had plenty of meat. 1 winter would be enough to restore them all. Finally, you stopped in front of the woman holding the child. The child lay motionless, his face flushed red. You touched the child's forehead. It was as hot as a small stove. Quickly, you pulled the woman into the cave, found an animal hide to wrap around the mother and child, and had them sit by the fire to warm up. Meanwhile, you paced anxiously. With no medicine available, how could you reduce the fever? Suddenly, your eyes lit up. That's right. Scraping therapy could help reduce fever. With that thought, you immediately began preparing. First, you set a pot of clear fish soup to boil by the hearth, looking for bones suitable for wuxia again. That previous Kong bird's beak was at least half a meter long. Just smash it and take a small piece, that would be enough. The woman holding the child had no idea what you were up to. Ever since you touched her child earlier, she had been frowning with worry, afraid that you might abandon her baby. At this thought, she couldn't help but shed tears. Just then, you walked over to her with a piece of the bird's beak and said, "Give me the child. I can help save him." The woman didn't fully understand, but she could sense that you treated her better than the previous chieftain had. So, trembling with fear, she handed the child over to you. Holding the bone fragment, you scraped red marks all over the child's body. The sleeping child frowned in pain, constantly whimpering. Seeing this, the child's mother immediately tried to snatch her baby back, but she was quickly restrained by 2 other women. Before long, you returned the child, now covered in red marks, to her, then prepared a bowl of fish soup and fed it to the child spoon by spoon. The child, who must have been starving for who knows how long, gulped it down as soon as it touched his lips. You breathed a sigh of relief. If he could eat, there was still hope. As long as he broke into a sweat soon, his little life would be saved. The woman finally relaxed completely. Though she didn't understand what you had just done, it didn't seem like you meant any harm to her child. With this relief, her stomach, which hadn't eaten in 2 days, growled loudly. She stared at the fish soup, swallowing hard. You immediately prepared another bowl of fish soup, along with a large piece of fish meat, and handed it to her. Then you took the child from her arms, wrapping him in animal hide to keep him warm. At that moment, you were deeply troubled. Even a simple fever could be fatal. For now, the food problem was temporarily solved, but what about clothing? To gather enough animal hides, they would need to hunt large animals. But with their current weapons, that was impossible. For future hunts, you would have to go out yourself, search for materials to make weapons, and at the very least, set up some traps. You silently vowed to yourself that before winter arrived, everyone would have a set of clothes. By the time everyone had finished eating, the little boy had woken up, drenched in sweat. You handed him back to the woman, personally tied his hair in the tribal style, and even gave him a name, Xubing, to spell illness. The woman was overjoyed. Not only had the new tribe's chieftain saved her child, but he had also given him the same hairstyle as everyone else, a sign that he had accepted her and her people. The others who had joined the tribe that day also had their hair styled with the help of the elders. At a glance, they now looked different from other tribes, more spirited and unified. With these tasks completed, you began crafting your own equipment. You selected a relatively straight stick, tied a spearhead made from a Kong bird's leg bone to one end, and created a primitive bone spear. Then you broke off a piece of the Kong bird's beak, sharpening it into a short dagger. The remaining materials were given to the lame man, so he could make one for himself as well. For now, these were the only 2 pieces of equipment. Everything had to be made by hand. Early the next morning, after the tribespeople had risen, you assigned new tasks. The apprentices continued making pottery. Ensuring everyone had a bowl was the top priority. The adult women were divided into 2 groups, one to gather wild fruits, the other to fish. The remaining children stayed behind to assist with preparations for hunting, led personally by you. The hunting party consisted of all its regular members, along with your 2 usual companions, Big Mouth and Monkey, as well as the newly acquired brothers, Big Fur and Little Fur, a total of 11 people. They marched into the jungle under the rising sun. Once inside the jungle, the hunting party spread out, with each adult hunting on their own. You, along with your 4 companions, Big Mouth, Monkey, Big Fur and Little Fur, each carried a basket on your backs. A bundle of straw ropes served as your tools. The trees in this forest were mostly nut-bearing species, each towering over 30 meters tall. Gazing at their meter-thick trunks, you felt utterly helpless. After all, metal tools were still beyond your reach. The ground was littered with fallen nuts, and from a distance you could spot large birds foraging. But throughout the journey you merely observed, refraining from hunting any animals. As a skilled hunter, the first step is to understand what inhabits your hunting grounds. Your followers grew increasingly impatient. Several times they spotted pearl guinea fowl feeding on nuts and were eager to give chase, but you paid them no mind. Instead, you kept pondering. Since this mountain formed a complete food chain, with small animals scattered throughout the forest, there must inevitably be large predators. And indeed, the footprints and droppings on the ground confirmed it. Soon, you discovered traces of wild boars. The chaotic footprints suggested a whole herd, but the depth of those prints sent a shiver down your spine. It seemed these boars weighed at least 1,000 jin. Remember, this was a true primordial jungle. Proceeding with caution, you finally crested the ridge, and your eyes lit up. Below, in the valley, a sparkling stream meandered, while to the west grew massive aloe plants. A dozen or so warthogs were drinking there, a complete family it seemed. The lead boar weighed an estimated 1,500 jin, followed by his first wife, second wife, third wife, and over 10 piglets the size of domestic hogs. Charging in headfirst was out of the question. Setting traps was the safer bet. You quietly retreated, crawling low to the ground, and returned to the woods. Your companions were terrified. They had only ever thought of hunting pheasants or raiding mouse burrows. Targets like these were beyond their wildest dreams, and you hadn't expected them to help anyway. You began setting traps alone, using straw ropes to create several figure 6 slip nooses over the boar's tracks, tying the other ends securely to large trees. Once a hoof stepped in, the noose would tighten automatically, gripping tighter the more the animal struggled. Such traps were ideal for the situation, simple and quick to make. For safety, you had your companions climb trees as you directed. Now, all that was needed was to drive the boars back along their path. Sneaking around to the bushes on the other side of the stream, you coated yourself in mud, held up 2 branches, and suddenly leaped out from behind the shrubs, shouting at the top of your lungs to scare them. The boars, having never seen such a creature, immediately bolted into the woods. You chased after them, yelling as you ran. Before long, agonized squeals echoed from ahead. Arriving at the trap zone, you found two struggling wild boars, the lead male prominently among them, along with an adult female. The straw ropes wouldn't hold for long. Gripping your spear, you cautiously approached, waiting for the right moment to thrust it deep into the boar's gaping mouth. The sharp tip pierced through the back of its neck, and blood gushed out as if it cost nothing. Soon, the 1,500 gene giant collapsed to the ground, its body twitching intermittently. You finally let out a long sigh of relief. But a new challenge quickly arose. How could 5 children possibly haul such a massive boar back? Glancing at the still struggling female nearby, an idea sparked in your mind. Without delay, you acted. First securing the sow to a tree with straw ropes, then binding her snout tightly to prevent biting, and finally using 2 more ropes too. They tied the sow's 2 front legs separately, then fastened the boar's rope to the sow's body. After everything was prepared, they led the way by pulling the pig's snout forward. Big Mouth and Monkey each held one of the sow's front legs, walking on either side, guiding the sow to pull the boar back for nursing. Big Mao and Little Mao followed at the rear with sticks, keeping watch to prevent any animals from ambushing them. Occasionally, they would smack the sow's rump with their sticks to urge her on. They trekked through the dense jungle this way until they finally caught sight of the tribe's cave in the distance. One of the companions clearing bushes outside spotted them first. He howled to alert the tribe. Before long, everyone swarmed out to greet them, but none dared to come too close. They had never seen such large prey before. You called for Lame Man and asked him to prepare a water vat and some salt. He immediately hobbled off to get them ready. When he brought the vat over, you dug a pit in the ground, placed the vat inside it so that the rim was just slightly above ground level. Then everyone pressed the sow down beside the vat, and with a single stab to its neck, the blood spurted directly into the vat without a single drop wasted. In no time, the vat was filled to the brim with blood. You poured in a bowl of salt water, stirred it well, and before long, it would turn into delicious blood curd to be used for soup that evening. The hide of the tusk boar would be tanned to make boots or backpacks. These 2 pigs would yield plenty of material. Beneath the skin was a thick layer of white fat, about 4 fingers thick, which would soon be rendered over the fire. Aside from the lungs, which would be used for fishing, everything else was edible. Even the larger bones were carefully removed to be fashioned into weapons or tools. The entire afternoon was spent processing these 2 massive 1,000-pound pigs. It was exhausting, but the results were immensely satisfying. The smoking racks were laden with chunks of meat, large and small. 1 vat of cooked blood curd, 3 vats of gleaming white lard. The children giggled as they continuously gathered the cracklings, and even Chu Bing ate happily. Just as Lame Man was firing up the kiln to temper pottery in the evening, the main group, busy all day, returned. The fishing team had caught several hundred fish, filling baskets to the brim, along with 2 large vats of fish roe. The hunting team did well too. 3 pheasants and 2 large snakes, over 10 bird eggs, and more than a dozen ground squirrels, plus a basket of nuts. But the biggest surprise came from the gathering team. Today, Chu Bing's aunt led the gathering team and discovered a new type of food, a very sweet root. When they peeled off the outer skin, they found natural amber-colored syrup inside. By collecting more, they could refine white sugar. You made sure to praise the young woman for this. Everyone ate together joyfully, but one person stood out from the rest. The tribal elder, his face dark with anger, was chasing Chu Bing's aunt with a thorny vine covered in red spines, whipping her relentlessly. From the memories of your original host, you knew that vine was the tribe's equivalent of a punishment tool, reserved for those who committed serious offenses. Seeing this, you quickly stopped the furious elder and asked him the reason for the beating. He gave an unbelievable explanation. That root was the temptation of the demon tree, and anyone who ate it would be devoured by the demon tree. Hearing this, you immediately ordered everyone to stop eating the root. Not because you truly believed his words, but out of concern that it might actually be poisonous or addictive. Because of this incident, you remained highly alert while sleeping that night, carefully monitoring any changes in your body. Fortunately, the night passed without incident. When the sky brightened and the tribespeople emerged, you began assigning the day's tasks. Most tasks remained the same as usual, with one exception. Chu Bing and his mother joined the pottery team. and you, with your 4 underlings, headed to the gathering team. You wanted to see for yourself. What exactly is the demonic technique the elder mentioned? The location of that tree lies deep in the back mountains, beyond the cave. This mountain doesn't have many tall trees, but the bushes are incredibly lush, and there are quite a few fruit trees as well. As you journey onward, you delightedly discover the chili peppers you've been longing for day and night, a fiery red patch hidden among the bushes. However, the tribespeople never eat these things. The spicy sensation makes them believe it's inedible. Right then, you order 4 of your followers to forget all other tasks for the day and focus solely on picking chili peppers here. You continue onward with the gathering team, crossing over a ridge, and a basin unfolds before your eyes. Here, you can see bluish-colored animals everywhere, scattered about like an unmarked burial ground. And at the center of this basin, a bizarre tree, roughly 60 meters tall, stands imposingly. Its roots sprawl across an area of 500 meters in diameter. The closer you get to the center, the denser the roots become, a pattern that seems to lure animals toward the trunk. Your intuition tells you that approaching the trunk is undoubtedly dangerous. Still, you decide to move closer for a better look. With your skills, you're confident you can retreat unscathed. With each step, you prod the ground ahead with your spear, slowly inching toward the center. But just as your spear touches the area, warn you of imminent danger. Without a second thought, you swiftly retract your spear and retreat the way you came. At that very moment, a series of sharp, whistling sounds suddenly descends from above. Over a dozen spikes, nearly 1.2 meters long, pierce straight into the ground, precisely where your spear had touched moments before. These spikes are oddly shaped, each about 1 centimeter in diameter, the shortest of them over a meter long, with a white flower the size of a fist at the base. Aren't these natural arrowheads? Joy suddenly surges within you, and the illusion of borrowing arrows with straw boats pops into your mind. Using your backpack as a target, you tie a long rope to it and toss it beneath the canopy. Whoosh, 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 instantly over a dozen spikes embed themselves into it. You pull the basket back, remove the spikes, and repeat the process until you've gathered 2 large bundles. Then use your spear to carefully retreat. On your way out, you instruct the women that the roots are edible, but they should only gather from the outer areas. On the way back to the tribe, you collect another 100 demon saplings from the forest, each already 3 centimeters thick. These saplings grow perfectly straight, making them ideal material for spears. You call over the 4 followers gathering chili peppers, and the 5 of you carry the saplings home together. Back at the tribe, the children gather around once again to marvel at the new items the leader has brought. But in the eyes of the pregnant women, everything you've brought back is utterly useless. The chili peppers are inedible, the sticks aren't thick enough to kill prey even if you hit them. Yet, this does nothing to dampen your cheerful mood. For the rest of the day, you focus on upgrading your equipment. The skin spikes feel smooth and sturdy. Edit glossary settings advanced about as thick as a cigarette. If fashioned into arrowheads, they'd make heavy arrows. Though range might suffer, their penetrating power would be formidable. As for the 3 centimeter thick saplings, their wood is so hard that simply charring the surface and sharpening one end to a point would make them perfectly serviceable. The task of sharpening the spearheads naturally falls to your 4 followers. From now on, everyone in the tribe will be equipped with these new spears. The only thing missing now is a bow. Given current conditions, only a longbow can be made. Clumsy, perhaps, but its power is nothing to scoff at. The best material for crafting a longbow is mulberry wood, which can be found in the forest where you hunted the wild boar yesterday. All you need is to find a piece of suitable size. But what's been on your mind the most is the aloe vera you discovered during the boar hunt. Its leaves are rich in fibers. It is the best material for making lazy ropes and can also be used to weave cloth for clothing. Though not as good as ramie, it is far superior to animal hides. Moreover, it is very durable and most importantly, the sap from its leaves can be used to treat wounds, reducing inflammation, detoxifying, clearing heat, and cooling the body. Thinking of this, you plan to start cultivating aloe vera on a large scale next year. By then, your tribe will have clothes to wear, and it will significantly reduce infections and deaths caused by injuries during hunting. You came to this forest to hunt wild boars and were fortunate to discover 2 mountain trees that had been knocked down by some unknown animal, already dried in the shade, perfect for crafting. After spending an entire day preparing stone axes and knives, and another full day of carving and chopping, a 1.5-meter long bow finally began to take shape. Another day of careful adjustments and polishing made it complete. The bowstring was twisted from sisal fibers, The arrows were made from ready-made thorns, and the fletching used the blue-green feathers of peacocks. You made over 200 arrows in one go. 3 evenings later, you gathered all the tribespeople in the clearing. 30 meters away, a straw target was set up, with several freshly caught marmots hanging from it. You first demonstrated the use of the javelin, hitting the target every time at 30 meters. Then, you showed close-range spear thrusting. The tribespeople watched with excitement, only then realizing that their leader had been crafting weapons these past few days. Except for the very young children, you gave every tribesperson a javelin. Hunting team members received 3 javelins each, while the remaining one was for close-range thrusting. The nearly grown children, aside from weeding and playing, were required to practice with the javelins daily. The standardized javelins were well-liked, and the tribespeople cherished these weapons. Aside from throwing stones, this was the only weapon capable of long-range attacks. With the javelins, you believed it wouldn't be long before they could bring back larger prey. If the javelins excited them, the bow and arrows were regarded as divine. From a distance of about 100 paces, you fired 5 consecutive arrows, all hitting the marmots. Everyone was stunned, crowding around eagerly just to touch the bow. However, you only demonstrated it for now, not planning to promote it yet, as crafting it was still too difficult. After successfully introducing the javelins, you began working on leather goods. 2 black wild boar hides, after repeated tanning, had become sturdy and flexible. To ensure everyone could have a pair, aside from your boots, which were entirely made of boar leather, all tribespeople received shoes made from wild boar hide, with uppers stitched from the pelts of various small animals. The boots you made yourself reached up to the knees, lined with soft, furry animal hair, making them exceptionally warm. The children proudly showed them off every day after putting them on. After your efforts, the tribe's already scarce supply of small animal hides was completely used up. As the weather grew colder, the need for animal hides became urgent. If not for the daily hot soup that warmed their bodies, many would likely have fallen ill from the cold. Now, every tribesperson had 3 pottery vessels, and there were many other pottery items as well, so pottery production was halted entirely. You assigned the lame man a new task: firing bricks. Once enough bricks were made, a larger kiln could be built, or even used for constructing walls. The weeding task assigned to the children was nearly completed. Dozens of acres of land outside the cave had been cleared entirely, ready for building houses or farming. However, without suitable seeds for now, only chili peppers could be planted. Sisal is a perennial plant. You plan to plant it on the back hill. Harvesting once a year is enough. With these long-term tasks arranged, you prepare to venture further away in search of large herbivores. The more furry hides, the better. As for the equipment needed for the journey, you've long since prepared everything: weapons, food, supplies, all ready and waiting. You check your gear over and over, still feeling like something important is missing. Out of the corner of your eye, you catch sight of the crowd. A small figure in tall boots, wearing a boar tusk necklace, keeps dodging and hiding behind others. Xubing, bring back my snakeskin water pouch. The little one hides behind his mother, holding your water pouch behind his back. Wah! Won't go, won't go. You walk over and ruffle Xubing's head, saying, Xubing, stay home and be good. I'm gonna find clothes for everyone. I'll be back soon. The child is clever. Under your deliberate guidance, he's already learned to speak a few simple words. Xubing pouts, wrinkling his chubby, bun-like face, and reluctantly hands you the water pouch. Come home. Teach me. Hit with stick. You chuckle and pinch his cheek, then hand the little one back to his mother. Life has been too hard for them. Since they've placed their trust in you, you're determined to lead them toward a better life. Then, under the gaze of your tribespeople, your figure disappears into the morning mist. The elder stares in the direction you vanished, his face full of worry. They've never seen anyone survive a night outside the cave. Meanwhile, you head upstream along the river, searching for a narrow spot to cross. Herbivores are usually found on the grasslands, but first, you must escape this endless forest. After walking all morning, the trees gradually grow shorter, which lifts your spirits, a sign that you're nearing the edge of the jungle. But the next moment, the sky suddenly darkens. The surrounding trees abruptly thicken, blocking out the sun and covering the entire river, forming a natural bridge. Not a single sound can be heard around you. You immediately sense something is wrong. This is a true primeval jungle. How could there not be a single bird call? You pick up a dry branch, coat it with lard, and light it with some embers, blowing gently. The bright torch finally gives you a sense of security. The lard on the torch crackles as it burns, bringing a bit of sound and light to the silent forest. You gather your belongings, hold the torch high, and climb onto the natural bridge. Crawling along the massive trunk, you inch forward bit by bit. Just as you reach the middle of the river, a drop of burning lard falls from the torch into the water. The next moment, a loud splash erupts, as if some enormous creature has flipped over in the river. The sudden movement startles you, making you shiver. Damn, good thing I didn't choose to swim across. After calming your nerves, you continue crawling forward. When you reach the junction of two trees in the middle, the branches suddenly double in density. You have no choice but to stick the torch to the side and clear a path with your stone axe. The axe strikes the trunk, sending vibrations that numb your hands. The unlucky torch, shaken loose by the impact, plunges downward. To your astonishment, a massive, saw-toothed maw instantly leaps out of the water, swallowing the burning torch in one gulp. The next second, a deafening roar echoes through the forest. The owner of that gaping mouth thrashes wildly in the water, churning up massive waves that sweep you off the branch. Immediately, the monster lunges at you, jaws wide. You quickly turn your back, and the creature clamps its teeth onto your backpack. The water monster's mouth gets firmly stuck in the woven frame of the pack. Wanting to vomit but unable to, wanting to bite through but unable to chew, only able to shake your head back and forth, you were also dragged, swaying left and right in the water, struggling to pull the bird-beak dagger from your boot with one swift motion. You cut one of the shoulder straps and the rope tied around your waist, only then could you laboriously turn around in the dark river water. It was impossible to tell what this thing even was with one hand. You desperately held onto the remaining shoulder strap while the other hand stabbed the water monster's head with the dagger. The water monster thrashed even more violently, pushing you high out of the water, then slamming you back down heavily, dragging you recklessly through the water. Seeing the rocks by the riverbank ahead, you flipped over and mounted the water monster's head, stabbing its eyes fiercely several times with the dagger. Blood and brain matter instantly gushed continuously from both eye sockets, churning up a large patch of the river. Gradually, the water monster's struggles weakened until finally it turned into mere twitching, exhausted. You swam to the opposite bank, resting for a while. By then, the water monster was completely dead, floating belly up on the river's surface. Your backpack was still firmly lodged in its mouth. You had no choice but to find a sturdy vine, thread it through the water monster's eye sockets, and exert immense effort to drag the creature ashore. Only then did you have time to examine the monster closely. Turns out, it was just a fish with a red head and a body nearly 5 meters long. After resting a while, you picked up the recipe book and began knocking out the big fish's molars, triangular teeth, each the size of a child's palm, more than 50 in total. Only after knocking them all out could you retrieve the backpack and check its contents. Fortunately, the fire starter tube hadn't taken in water. Other items were slightly damaged, but still usable. But just as you were thinking of making a fire to dry your clothes, a series of footsteps suddenly came from the woods. Turning to look, you saw a woman with pale skin accompanied by a little girl staring at you in terror. Then the two of them screamed and took off running, dropping a round object on the ground. Walking over to look, you found it was a wooden bucket made from a hollowed-out log, burned clean in the middle. Judging by the situation, the two women had likely come to fetch water. Now they had abandoned the bucket and fled. They might return with others soon. Sure enough, not long after, the water-fetching woman returned with several members of her tribe. They wore white fur robes, their skin as pale as if coated in powder. The group formed a semicircle, watching cautiously, surprised by the large fish behind you. A man, who seemed to be the leader, locked eyes with you, pointing at the wooden bucket nearby. You immediately understood his meaning. Using the spear to lift the bucket, you handed it to him. The leader took the bucket, muttering something in his language, then pointed at the large fish behind you. Though you couldn't understand his words, you grasped his meaning from his gestures toward the fish. Casually stepping aside, you made way for the fish. The group rushed over, immediately pummeling the big fish violently. Some of the women even began to sob. The leader smiled, pounded his chest with his fist, then extended his fist toward you, leaving you confused. But seeing his friendly expression, it likely wasn't a challenge to fight. Hesitantly, you bumped fists with him. The man laughed heartily and gave you an enthusiastic hug, then began chattering animatedly, trying to communicate through gestures and expressions. Even without a common language, expressions and body language made communication possible. You explained that you came from the other side of the river and were searching for an animal with horns on its head. The man nodded in understanding, then told you many people from their tribe had been eaten by this fish. To thank you for killing the monster, I hope you can visit their tribe. As evening approached, and since your two tribes were not far apart, there might be opportunities for trade in the future, so you decided to accept his invitation. You gestured for them to bring the fish ashore, explaining that it was edible. The man looked astonished. In their experience, only the pink creatures eaten by fish existed. They had never considered eating fish themselves. Nevertheless, they agreed. Because the fish was so large, it had to be butchered before being divided into portions. You continued working. The silverfish skin measured 4 meters long and 3.5 meters wide. Smooth, elastic, and most importantly, waterproof. You promptly stored it away. After cleaning the rest of the fish meat, it was cut into large pieces and carried off. Their tribe was located within the forest. After walking for less than 10 minutes, you saw a massive tree. The interior space was about 100 square meters. Though not large, it was sufficient for their needs, as their population was very small. There were only 14 adults, including both men and women, and with all the children, the total was just 32. You named this tree-dwelling tribe the Tree Tribe. Their pale skin was a result of living their entire lives in the dark forest. But that didn't mean they were unaware of the outside world. Their elder, along with the chieftain Big Tree, led you up to the lookout platform. It stood higher than the surrounding dark forest, offering a view into the distance. Pointing east, the elder told you that beyond the dark forest in that direction stood a mountain resembling clouds in the sky. On that mountain lived an animal with 2 sharp horns and fur the color of the present sky. They ran as fast as the wind, and no one could catch them. Based on his description, you guessed it was likely a type of large antelope. Chasing them would be futile, but if you set traps in advance, success would be assured. You felt confident, but Big Tree and the elder held little hope for your plan. Seeing the elder fall silent, Big Tree recommended his own clothing to you. It was made from the pelts of rabbits over 1/2 meter long. These rabbits fed on moss and mushrooms in the forest, which were abundant in the dark woods. Your eyes lit up immediately. Rabbits were a valuable resource. After all, rabbits, much like rats, are prolific breeders. Litters of 5 or more are common, and young rabbits reach sexual maturity in just 4 months, allowing them to reproduce continuously, with an average of 1 litter every 2 months. If you could bring back 2 pairs of adult rabbits and train them within a year, they could multiply into hundreds. By then, the entire tribe would never lack for clothing again, and rabbit meat would become a significant food source. Envisioning the rabbit-raising plan, you nearly drooled with anticipation. After dinner that evening, Big Tree mentioned he was taking his tribe out to hunt and asked if you wanted to join. You were surprised at first, but since rabbits are nocturnal animals, hunting at night made sense, so you agreed. Soon, a beauty from the tribe brought a black branch covered with dense twigs, and you set out. Upon arrival, you didn't take action, instead quietly observing from the sidelines to see how they caught rabbits. Big Tree and his group first gathered some mushrooms and placed them beneath a black ironwood tree. Then they hid nearby. Before long, a plump rabbit hopped over, cautiously scanning its surroundings. Seeing no movement, it slowly approached the mushrooms. At that moment, Big Tree and the others rushed out, using the densely branched sticks to quickly trap the rabbit, leaving it unable to move. Only then did they use a wooden spike to finish it off. This was their method of hunting, and they had caught it alive. Instantly, you were struck with the idea of trading with them. Wouldn't it be great if they could help you catch rabbits? Then you moved to another spot and set up your ritual again. This time, you decided to show off your own skills. You took out your longbow and pulled out an arrow. Deshu stared blankly, unsure what this object was. Just then, another rabbit peeked out cautiously, still over 10 meters away from the mushrooms. Deshu quickly tugged at you, signaling you to prepare to charge with him. Ignoring him, you drew the bow and knocked the arrow. With a swift whoosh, the arrow pierced straight through the rabbit's neck. Deshu was utterly stunned, gazing wide-eyed at your bow and arrow. Smiling, you handed the longbow to him along with an arrow. Guiding his hands, you showed him how to draw the bow, and together you shot another arrow at the rabbit on the ground. With another whoosh, half of the 1-meter-long arrow buried itself in the ground. The people of the Tree Tribe gasped in awe, filled with reverence for this miraculous weapon. Seeing how Deshu held the bow and arrow, unable to put it down, you gifted him a feathered arrow as a token of friendship between the two of you. From then on, the hunt became a solo archery performance by you. In just half a night, you had shot over a dozen rabbits, a number they could never have imagined. On a normal day, catching 3 or 4 rabbits would have been cause for celebration. At the same time, the people of the Tree Tribe secretly speculated about the strength of your tribe. Upon returning, as per your request, the spoils, rabbit pelts and meat were divided. The Tree Tribe naturally had no objections. Now, if they stayed here a while longer, they could surely gather enough pelts for their tribe. Your initial goal for this trip had been achieved, but you wanted to venture even farther, to thoroughly explore this world. Moreover, you were very interested in the animal the tree elder had mentioned. Perhaps capturing a few alive to pull carts wouldn't be a bad idea. At dawn the next day, you replenished your food and fire supplies before bidding farewell to Deshu. You also asked him to help catch some live rabbits for you, to be fed daily with grass and bread. Upon your return, you would exchange them for other game. He was reluctant to see you leave, knowing that with you around, their winter would undoubtedly be much easier. But he understood you had unfinished business, so he agreed. After parting ways with the tree tribe, you walked on, cutting branches and sticking them into the ground as markers. After 2 full days of walking, you finally emerged from the dark forest. Ahead, the view opened up dramatically. A vast grassland stretched before you, with only scattered trees in sight. On the ground, you noticed footprints of herbivores. You took out your bow and arrow, cautiously moving forward. Soon, the sight before you made you laugh with delight. A herd of blue horselings, about the size of domestic donkeys, were grazing peacefully with their heads down. They would be perfect to take back and use as donkeys. Instantly, you thought of capturing them alive. But these blue horselings were clearly not to be trifled with. Just the sight of the sharp horns on their heads told you that, if you approached recklessly, the entire herd might turn on you at once, and it would take the whole tribe to handle them. Upon closer observation, you realized it was the animals' mating season. Among this herd of blue horselings, there was only 1 adult male, while the rest were 8 females and 8 juveniles. Seeing this, a plan quickly formed in your mind. Using the same method as for dealing with Kong birds, if you could first subdue the male, the others would surely follow. You carefully retreated to a safe distance and began crafting a sling. Before long, you returned with the sling, sneaking closer. Hiding quietly behind a bush, you waited for the right moment. Soon, a perfect opportunity arose. The male horseling was mounting a female, happily grazing while quickly swinging the sling into action. The propeller-like slingshot suddenly whistled through the air, swooping toward the male and female pair. In an instant, it entangled the hind legs of the 2 blue horse bells. The male and female creatures shuddered violently, collapsing to the ground with a thud as they wailed incessantly. Then, with a flick of your wrist, a lasso flew through the air like a cowboy's, landing steadily around the horns of 2 nearby female malins. Instantly, the herd of blue malins grew restless, darting chaotically in all directions. Before long, several of them were tightly entangled, howling and struggling in vain. Seeing this, the remaining 2 female malins fled with their 8 young, kicking up dust as they ran. You watched helplessly as the 10 malins escaped, unable to do anything but tie the legs of the remaining ones with ropes. Taming wild animals is no easy task, especially for a species as combative as the blue malin. The first step is to break their pride, and you chose the most direct and brutal method, using a stone axe to shatter their prized hooves, then searing the stumps with hot coals to prevent regrowth. The 7 malins, once fiercely resistant, now cowered like timid quails. Finally, you tied the lead malin with a rope and strung the rest together in a line. By the time you finished, dusk had fallen, and you led them to a small stream where you cooked dried rabbit meat for dinner. To the northeast of the stream stood a colorful stone mountain, glowing with vibrant hues under the setting sun. From the colors alone, you could tell it was a multi-mineral symbiotic deposit, a discovery that thrilled you. Eager to explore, you had to restrain yourself as night had fully descended. The next morning, you were awakened by a chorus of roars. The sight before you nearly made you leap with excitement. In the grove where you had tied the blue malins, the 2 females that had escaped yesterday had returned with their 8 lively young and even brought along an adult male malin from who knows where. Hiding in the bushes, you repeated your earlier tactics, and soon your herd of malins grew from 7 to 18. With the sky now bright, you rode the lead malin in high spirits toward Babeo Mountain. The area was indeed rich with treasures. Upon closer inspection, you realized it was a copper ore deposit, with the other colors indicating associated minerals. With these ores, crafting bronze tools no longer seemed a distant dream. The associated minerals also had their uses. The orange was realgar, which could be used medicinally for snake and insect bites or internally for parasites. The white was kaolin, ideal for smelting iron, and the red mounds, though just termite nests, contained weathered soil perfect for pottery making. The journey from Babeo Mountain to your tribe was only a 3-day walk, but with blue malins pulling a cart, it could be much faster. All you needed was to build a bridge first. With your plan set, you took a moment to appreciate the surroundings. To the east of Babeo Mountain lay a vast wetland with lush water plants at the foothills, a paradise for wildlife. Knee-high ryegrass, waist-high wood cotton, and towering field grass thrived, all favorites of herbivores. The open space in front of the tribe's cave would be perfect for growing these grasses to support your rabbit-raising venture and the soon-to-be laboring blue malins. You also gathered some broadleaf water spinach and water celery to supplement your vitamin intake. Just as you were worrying about how to carry the grass seeds, a large snakeskin draped over the mangrove quickly caught your attention. You decisively collected it. In half an afternoon, you gathered a bag of grass seeds, tied it to the back of a mare, and began searching for your dinner. Soon, an ancient giant goose with a wingspan of 5 meters was brought down from the sky by 2 swift arrows from you. Every feather that could hold an arrow was plucked clean. You planned to roast it whole to replenish the dwindling rabbit meat in your backpack. But as you crouched by the water's edge, cleaning the goose nearly brought tears to your eyes. You actually found in its stomach undigested grains, a type of mini grain you had never seen before, each one slightly larger than a mung bean. This was the first grain crop you had discovered in this world. Your first thought was that you must find its source. That night you did not rest. Gathering some branches, you began urgently crafting equipment to venture deeper into the swamp. You had to harvest those grains before the animals got to them. Early the next morning, carrying a simple canoe, you found a spot where the water was deep enough and paddled toward the heart of the marshland. Meanwhile, in the dark forest, Dashu was leading his tribe in hunting snow hares. To meet the needs of both you and his tribe, almost the entire clan was mobilized day and night, leaving only the elders and children under 6 to guard the home. To increase the yield, he even resorted to forceful methods, digging out rabbit burrows directly upon finding them, using fire and smoke to drive the rabbits out if they didn't emerge. This method proved effective, allowing him to catch quite a few, including several litters of newborn rabbits. However, this hunting style also brought disaster upon his tribe. In this season, every tribe, without exception, stored food. The cannibal tribe was no different. Their food source was live humans. Men captured by them were used to fill their stomachs, while women were kept to bear children or for other purposes. On the day you ventured deep into the swamp, a hunting party from the cannibal tribe was drawn by the firelight from Dashu's rabbit roasting. The party consisted entirely of adult males, numbering 40 in total. Their weapons were all stone axes and wooden spears, making them a formidable force, especially the 2 leaders who actually rode 2 juvenile Xianxias. In comparison, the tree tribe, even with all its men, women, and children combined, could not match their numbers. Faced with such a powerful enemy, Dashu and his tribe chose to flee immediately. The cannibal tribe pursued them closely. Fortunately, Dashu knew the terrain well and deliberately took difficult paths to escape, temporarily evading the enemy. But some still fell behind. A little girl gathering mushrooms, terrified, tripped over a tree root while running and fell. As soon as she got up, a flying axe struck her in the back, and she was swiftly killed by a pursuing enemy's spear. A group of savage cannibals laughed heartily as they surrounded her, beginning to drink her blood. Dashu gritted his teeth until they creaked, but he did not stop. He knew that even if the entire tribe fought back, they would only be slaughtered. Because of the little girl's death, the enemy's pursuit stalled briefly. Dashu hurried back to the tribe and informed the elder about the situation. The enemy was too powerful. They stood no chance and had no choice but to migrate. Elder Tree made the final decision. Dashu would lead the tribe east through the dark forest to find you. After all, judging by your weapons, your tribe must be very powerful. The elder himself would stay behind to delay the enemy, as he was too old to move quickly anyway. Suppressing his grief, Dashu nodded solemnly, hurriedly had everyone pack all their belongings, and set off eastward. He had no confidence in his heart either. You had been gone for several days. Where were you now? Were you even still alive? He had no idea about any of it. But staying put meant certain death. He had no other choice. Not long after, the pursuing enemies found their tribe. The tree house they had inhabited for generations was now engulfed in flames. Elder Tree had set the fire, hoping to burn a few of the intruders and buy everyone some time. After this upheaval, the tree tribe, which originally had only 32 members, was now down to 30. The group trudged on dejectedly, pressing eastward toward the black forest without rest. At first, Big Tree held little hope of finding you, but when he saw the fresh branches stuck obliquely into the ground along the way, his confidence was instantly restored. In just a day and a half, they reached the outskirts of the black forest. By the time they emerged, it was already dusk. The sky, bathed in the glow of the setting sun, turned crimson. The tribespeople of the tree tribe were immediately captivated by the sight before them. This was their first glimpse of the outside world. But Big Tree remained frowning. The guiding marks ended here. He had no idea where to search next. Just as he was at a loss, he suddenly noticed signs of life by the stream. Drawing closer, he saw numerous animal footprints in the soft mud, among them the distinct imprints of your peculiar boots. Big Tree breathed a sigh of relief. He knew you must be nearby, so he had all the tribespeople settle there for the night. While Big Tree and his people were fleeing for their lives, you were deep in the marsh, carefully searching all around. Finding rice among the dense reeds was no easy task. Suddenly, your eyes lit up with an idea. Waterbirds loved this kind of rice, so you only needed to look where the waterbirds gathered. With that thought, you sprang into action, paddling your canoe while vigorously slapping the water with a stick. Suddenly, from a reed thicket not far away, a flock of waterbirds burst into the air with a rustle. You swiftly paddled toward the direction they had taken flight. As you drew closer, a small patch of rice with hanging panicles gradually came into view. Your eyes blazed with excitement, and a thought flashed through your mind. This was the wild rice you had been searching for. Immediately, you paddled even harder toward that shallow mudflat. But just as your boat was about to reach its destination, a chorus of human shouts erupted behind you. Turning toward the sound, you saw several naked primitive people clinging to floating logs on the water, waving at you and shouting incessantly, their expressions filled with urgency. These were the Linbrew, a tribe of just over 50 people living in this marshland. At that moment, they were gathering their winter reserves, water chestnuts. Suddenly spotting a fellow human floating on a miraculous object and drifting slowly toward the deathly forbidden land spoken of by their elders, out of goodwill, Ling Chao, the leader of the Ling tribe's gathering team, hurriedly shouted at you, hoping to stop you from going further. Unfortunately, you couldn't understand their language and only stared back in confusion. Seeing that you weren't responding, Ling Chao quickly swam toward you. While you were still bewildered, she had already reached your boat. She pointed frantically at the reeds where the rice grew thickly, shouting non-stop, her face a mix of anxiety and fear. Seeing that she meant no harm, you relaxed a little. Judging by her expression, she seemed to be warning you of danger ahead and urging you not to go. You gestured, mimicking the movements of a wild beast. He mimicked the sound of a beast with his mouth, then pointed toward the reed bed. Could there be a beast there? Ling Chao shook his head, pointed at you, then at the area, and placed his hand on the water's surface, mimicking an animal slowly sinking. He was indicating that you would sink if you went there. Understanding his meaning, you breathed a sigh of relief. You were grateful for his kind warning, but you had made thorough preparations and had no reason to give up now. So you paddled the oar and resolutely drifted toward the reed bed. Ling Chao immediately shouted anxiously at you again, but he did not swim forward. After all, he still had his own tribe and young children to care for. The next moment, however, he was stunned speechless. He watched as you tied two plank-like objects to the soles of your feet, then held a square board as large as a person. With ease, you stepped onto what was known as the death ground. Yet you did not sink. Everyone who witnessed this scene gasped in astonishment. They had never seen anyone walk on the death ground without sinking. But you, who appeared so relaxed, were not as carefree as they imagined. Beneath the reeds was all silt. With each step, you had to exert tremendous effort to lift your feet out of the mud. After an immense struggle, you finally reached the small patch of rice. Each stalk stood about 2 meters tall, bearing plump, golden rice ears. You took out the snakeskin bag you had prepared in advance and vigorously stripped every last grain from the rice stalks. Only after collecting every single grain did you stop. With 2 large bags full of rice, you returned to your small boat, happily preparing to paddle home and begin your farming journey. But just as you had paddled a short distance away, you were surrounded by members of the Lin tribe. The group stared at your raft, loaded with 2 heavy bags, yet still floating on the water. Their eyes lit up instantly. They realized that this floating object could not only carry people but also hold goods. A few clever individuals immediately imagined themselves paddling such a boat to gather water caltrops. You felt a surge of anger as you looked at the crowd, but since they seemed to have no ill intentions, you held back your temper. Ling Chao noticed your rising irritation and quickly gestured, asking if you could teach them how to make such a thing. Glancing around, you noticed the skin of those soaking in the water was swollen, and recalling Linko's earlier kindness, you gladly agreed. You gestured for them to gather everyone's floating logs, arranging them neatly. Then, using reeds as ropes, you tied the logs together. You instructed Ling Chao to climb onto the raft. Sure enough, it remained stable, supporting him on the water's surface. Ling Chao grew excited and eagerly called for his tribesmen to try it out. Unfortunately, the raft could only seat 2 people. Adding one more would likely capsize it. Those who couldn't board looked enviously at Ling Chao, but he was overjoyed. He knew this method was simple to replicate, and the materials were readily available in the tribe. He could already envision a raft-building craze sweeping through the tribe upon his return. With this thought, Ling Chao looked at you gratefully and warmly invited you to visit the Lin tribe. However, you declined. Outside the marsh, a herd of blue marlins was waiting for you. Ling Chao did not insist. Instead, he handed you a jumbo-sized water caltrip as large as an egg as a token of gratitude, promising that if you ever faced difficulties, you could present this caltrip for help. Horn came to the Lin tribe seeking help. You cheerfully accepted the water chestnuts. Without a moment's delay, you set off with 2 generations of rice seeds for the grassland at the foot of Mount Baobao. After a full day of urgent harvesting, you received about 60 jin of encouragement in total. Yet you couldn't bear to eat a single one, only wanting to quickly transport these treasures home, to plant them during next year's spring plowing. But since you're going to farming tools are naturally indispensable. So you also need to gather some copper or in tin or to smelt and make some farming tools back home. Just as the tree tribe emerged from the dark forest, you were on the small grassland on the other side of Mount Baobao, eating deliciously fatty grilled river fish, while weaving large baskets, preparing for the next day's mining work. But the tree tribe on the west side of Mount Baobao had it rough. They hadn't brought fire starters when they fled. For the past 2 days, they'd only been chewing on dried meat. At night, they were both cold and hungry, forced to huddle together for warmth. The next day at dawn, after a good night's sleep, you, full of energy, led the blue horse Lin, heading towards the west side of Mount Baobao. Meanwhile, at the western foot of Mount Baobao, the tree tribe was distributing wild fruits they had just gathered to their clansmen. At that moment, several clansmen excitedly pointed at Mount Baobao and shouted. From afar, they saw a young man leading a group of 4-horned beasts slowly moving across the bare rocky mountain. You also heard the shouts from below. Following the sound, you spotted the tree tribe beside the small stream, though you were somewhat puzzled about why they had come. After more than 10 minutes, the tree tribe leader climbed up the hillside with a group of people. Seeing their condition, you couldn't help but frown. Why had they even brought children along? And everyone was covered in dirt. When the tree leader saw you again, he was utterly amazed. He knew you were looking for a certain kind of ore, but he never expected to actually find you, and with so much fire at that. This was clearly not a cannibal tribe. Those people riding strange creatures could threaten you. At this moment, you seemed like a godlike presence in his heart. Look, each of them only held a wild fruit in hand, clearly unable to even get meat to eat. Quickly, you brought out the leftover grilled river fish and shared it with them. The tree leader crouched by the fire, eating while recounting their experiences of the past few days. Other clansmen chimed in too, using gestures and words to explain everything. Once you understood, you couldn't help but gasp in shock. There were actually cannibals nearby. Suddenly, a terrifying thought crossed your mind. Since the cannibals had already reached the tree tribe, how far could they be from your own tribe? At this point, you immediately decided to mine all the ore today and head back first thing tomorrow. You could only hope the river would delay them for a few more days. Then you turned to the tree leader, asking what their plans were next. Hearing this, everyone in the tree tribe lowered their heads, unsure how to respond. Winter was fast approaching, but their tribe had been burned to the ground, and they were being pursued by a tribe of 10. They didn't know where to go to find a place to settle down. Seeing this, you directly extended an invitation. Why don't you join my tribe? The food we've stored is enough for all of us to last through winter. Hearing this, the tree leader's eyes immediately lit up. He completely believed what you said. Just the herd of 4-horned beasts before them would be enough to feed everyone through winter. The other tree tribe members also wanted to agree. They had seen how powerful your bow and arrows were. With weapons like that, they would never lack for game, nor would they be bullied by enemies. So they all looked eagerly at their leader, hoping he would accept the offer. The tree leader was already tempted, but as their chief, he needed to be more cautious. After hesitating for a while, he finally asked the question. You invited us to join your tribe? Will your chieftain agree? Hearing this, you couldn't help but laugh. Don't worry about that, because I am the chieftain. Big Tree looked utterly incredulous. A child like you is the chieftain? But after a moment's thought, he understood. He had witnessed your abilities firsthand. The things you had accomplished, even an adult might not have managed them. With that in mind, he hesitated no longer and decisively agreed to join your people. To completely dispel their doubts, you handed your spear directly to Big Tree, gave a wooden bucket to a man named Wooden Barrel, and presented the bronze token for harvesting grain to a clansman called Stump. You knew very well that, by willingly giving them weapons, they would surely understand that you meant them no harm. After all, who would hand over such fine weapons to an enemy? Sure enough, as soon as the group received the weapons, they broke into smiles. Big Tree also brought out the rabbits you had earlier instructed him to capture alive. There were more than 30 in all, though most were still young. At the sight, you couldn't contain your excitement. Considering how rabbits reproduce every 2 months, your tribe would never have to worry about hides again. After breakfast, Big Tree assumed you would set off immediately. But to his surprise, you began digging for stones on the mountain again. He asked what use these stones could possibly have. With these stones, I can make better weapons. Then we'll be able to hunt enough food to eat 3 full meals a day, and still have leftovers. 3 meals a day with leftovers? Big Tree and the others were utterly stunned. Such a life was beyond anything they had ever known. Without needing further instruction, they all spontaneously joined in and helped with the digging. With dozens of people pitching in, the work progressed much faster. By noon, all the large baskets were filled. This time, they had gathered several types. Chalcopyrite and tin ore were the most abundant, while red termite nest clay and kaolin were also collected in quantity, materials for making crucibles and casting molds. Once everything was packed, you set off with the group of several dozen. Each blue horse's back was laden with 2 baskets, large or small, carrying ores, fodder, medicinal herbs, and seeds. The journey was not rushed. As you walked, you taught Big Tree and the others how to use the weapons you had given them. By nightfall, you found a wide, open area to rest and have supper. The first half of the night was quiet, with only the crackling of the campfire. But in the latter half, as you lay on the ground, you suddenly felt tremors through the earth, as if something massive was moving. Instantly, you recalled the long-trunked beasts Big Tree had mentioned. Immediately, you roused everyone and ordered all fires extinguished. Amid 2 sharp, somewhat youthful shouts, 2 enormous figures suddenly appeared in the distant firelight. Soon after, dozens of people holding torches and weapons came into view. Around their necks hung necklaces made of human bones. The leader, a tall man, waved his hand, and the entire group charged toward you with savage intent. Drawing on rich combat experience from a past life, you remained remarkably calm. You quickly began issuing orders. A clansman named Wooden Stockade was to lead the group on a detour north to escape, while Big Tree, Wooden Barrel, and Stump stayed with you to cover the rear. Though only 4 of you remained, you swiftly devised a tactic based on the enemy's equipment. Their 2 leaders rode atop terror birds, slower and far less agile than your group. Most of their fighters were armed only with stone axes. Primitive throwing weapons like stones an average person can throw them at most 50 or 60 meters. But the bow and arrow in your hand. Shooting unarmored targets within 100 meters is still feasible. So as long as you create distance, you are confident you can take them all out before they enter their effective range. At this moment, Dashu watched the enemies charging fiercely on their mounts, feeling somewhat nervous. His hand holding the spear was trembling slightly, but seeing how remarkably calm you were beside him, he gritted his teeth and forced himself to steady his nerves, silently counting the enemy's distance in his mind. 200 meters, 150 meters, 100 meters. Then he drew his bow and released an arrow. With a sharp whoosh, one of the enemies at the forefront instantly fell to the ground. The arrow had pierced straight through his chest. Seeing a sharp wooden shaft protruding from their companion's back, the surrounding enemies froze for a moment. In that brief moment of hesitation, 2 more arrows whizzed through the air, and 2 more men collapsed heavily. At that point, the enemy captain spotted him in the distance, let out a furious roar, and urged his tribesmen to charge forward, starting with a volley of stone axes. Jianzhuangdi immediately pulled Dashu behind a large tree for cover. Mutong followed suit and hid as well. Meanwhile, Xuzhuang assumed a bow stance, turning sideways to block with his rattan shield. A series of dull thuds followed as several stone axes and a bone spear slammed directly into the shield. Fortunately, the shield was woven from thick vines, so Xuzhuang remained unharmed. But with this kind of bombardment, hidden behind the tree, Mutong saw the scattered stone axes on the ground and immediately picked up 2, hurling them back. Amid the dense charging formation, 2 enemies were struck and fell instantly. Whether they were dead or not was unclear. Dashu, once a hunter, naturally didn't want to be left out. He grabbed a bone spear and hurled it back as well, pinning one enemy to the ground on the spot, clearly dead beyond any doubt. You quickly signaled the others to run, urging them to create distance and fight from afar. And so, the cycle repeated. The enemy's original force of 40 was now down to just 7. The rest were either dead or injured. Suddenly, you called a halt to the group's frantic sprint, standing about 80 meters from the enemy, locking eyes with them. The enemy leader, seeing you stop running, was puzzled. With only a handful of his men left, all exhausted and half dead, he flew into a rage. Immediately, he whipped his mount and charged toward the north. You steadied your breathing, raised your bow, and prepared to shoot when he was about 70 meters away. The arrow struck his right eye directly. The leader let out a sharp cry and fell from his mount. As he fell northward, the advancing Kongxiang trampled him with its hind leg, killing him instantly. The Kongxiang suddenly felt as though it had stepped on something soft. It jerked its head around to look and immediately froze in horror, standing completely still on the spot. The remaining followers, though confused about how their leader had died so suddenly, didn't stop their forward charge. You immediately gave the order to counterattack. 3 spears and an arrow flew through the air in an instant. 3 enemies dropped heavily to the ground. Now only 3 were left alive. Terrified, they turned and fled. One of them, still mounted, tried to steer the Kongxiang around, but finding it too slow, he leaped off its back. You fired another arrow immediately. Before he even hit the ground, the arrow pierced through his chest. He stumbled a few steps backward before collapsing face down. Dashu and the other 2 rushed up from behind you. 3 stone axes whistled through the air, taking out the last 2 enemies. And so, this jungle chase and guerrilla battle finally came to an end. Dashu and the others could hardly believe it. Their group of just 4 had managed to wipe out a force of 40, along with the 2 juvenile Kongxiang. At this moment, having lost control, they all stood dumbfounded in place. You immediately gave a mental command for Stump to wait where he was, for Barrel to go find and bring back the tribesmen, and for Big Tree to go with you to finish off those who hadn't been killed. The 3 of them, proud as ever, immediately split up to act. You retrieved the feather sword, and also gathered the intact drum feathers and stone axes. Unexpectedly, the 2 uncontrolled mammoths had been following behind you the whole time, occasionally gently nudging your back with their trunks. It seemed they intended to stick with you. You hurriedly pushed their trunks away, saying, "Don't follow me. I can't afford to feed you." After all, these were real mammoths. Once fully grown, they would become massive beasts weighing around 15 tons. How much would such creatures need to eat in a day? Just then, Big Tree frowned and told you, "Along the way, we only found 36 bodies, for fewer than the original 40. You immediately felt a sense of foreboding. But with such a vast black forest, there was no way to search further now. You had no choice but to let it go. By daybreak, Stump and Barrel finally brought the main group back. When everyone sat down to eat as usual, Big Tree distributed the captured stone axes to everyone. Now, except for the children, everyone had a weapon for self-defense. The blue horsebells and rabbits still ate the forage they carried with them. But now, 2 unfamiliar giants had shown up to freeload. The forage that should have lasted 2 more meals was suddenly gone. You felt a headache coming on and raised your fist to drive them away. Unexpectedly, as soon as you raised your fist, one of the mammoths looked at you with pitiful eyes, as if on the verge of tears. The other mammoth actually used its trunk to grab a bundle of grass and offered it directly to you, as if to say, "Here, you can have some of this tasty grass. Please don't chase us away." Seeing this, you forced a smile uglier than crying, helplessly took the grass, and stuffed it back into its mouth. Then, you took out 2 more bundles of grass for them to eat slowly. Immediately after, you urged everyone to pack up and set off. After walking a long way, you saw the 2 mammoths still munching on the grass and couldn't help but sigh in relief. You had finally shaken them off. The group headed west for the entire morning and finally reached the place where you had once battled the lungfish. Now, you faced a problem. How were the blue horsebells carrying thee or supposed to cross? Soon, an idea came to you. You had everyone gather long branches, and under their astonished gazes, a raft slowly took shape. Once all the ore was loaded onto the raft, you had everyone climb across the tree bridge first and unload the ore on the other side. In the end, only you and the 18 blue horsebells remained. To ensure the horsebells crossed the river obediently, You jumped into the water and led them across one by one, swimming alongside them. After everything was packed up again, the group continued along the riverbank. Compared to the stifling density of the Black Forest, the scenery on the west bank of the small river was entirely different. Here, sunlight could filter through the leaves into the forest, warming people's bodies with its gentle rays. Big Tree and the others had never seen such a sight before and excitedly ran wild through the woods, startling flocks of young chickens foraging on the ground along the way. With a single raise of your hand, you could catch one. By evening, they had gathered quite a harvest. Meanwhile, little Chu Bing was by the river with his mother, finishing up work. He kept glancing northward. That was the direction the chief had left from. Ever since you had gone, he came to the river with his mother every day to fish, just so he could wait for you there. Seeing his mother already starting to pack up the fish they hadn't caught, he grew increasingly disappointed. Once again, the chief hadn't returned today. The woman smiled and ruffled his little head to comfort him. But in reality, he wasn't entirely sure whether you could return safely. After all, you were still just a child. At this thought, he couldn't help but glance worriedly toward the north. But as he looked, he unexpectedly spotted several figures among the distant trees. "People over there. Grab your weapons," he urgently shouted. The women of the Wu Yi team quickly set down the day's fishing gear, each pulling out a long white spear, cautiously keeping an eye on the small birds nearby. And at a glance, he recognized the one leading the way was the chief of their own tribe. He immediately jumped up, shouting joyfully, "Mom! The chief is back!" Hearing the commotion in the distance, you also happily waved your hands and shouted, "I'm back!" Just then, two loud roars echoed from across the river, drawing everyone's attention. Hearing the sound, your heart instantly felt as if 10,000 alpacas were stampeding through your mind. You never thought that, even after traveling so far, you still couldn't shake off those two stubborn creatures. Silently, you prayed, "Please don't come over, please don't come over." But as fate would have it, with two loud splashes, the elephants leaped into the river. In less than half a minute, they stood before you, dripping wet. Unexpectedly, the two beasts had no sense of honor. As soon as they reached you, they sprayed you with the water they just sucked into their trunks, drenching you completely. The message was clear. Who told you to leave them behind? You wiped the water off your face helplessly. "If you want to eat at my place from now on, you'll have to work for me. I won't raise you for free." In response, the two elephants tapped your head with their trunks, leaving you unsure of what they meant. The women of the Wu Yi team, upon seeing the two giant beasts, were all startled. But noticing how familiar they seemed with the chief, they quickly turned to expressions of admiration. "The chief is truly amazing. Even such huge monsters can be tamed." Xiao Zubing was the first to run over, hugging your leg tightly, showing no fear of the giant beasts nearby. You informed them that the newcomers were newly joined tribe members, then led everyone back to the cave. Xiao Zubing was placed on the elephant's back, looking proud and majestic throughout the journey. Along the way, the members of the original tribe and the fishing team exchanged curious glances. The fishing team's attention was mostly fixed on the 18 blue horse bells, while Deshu and the others observed the women of the Han tribe, noticing their hairstyles, leather boots, the fish in their baskets, and the white spears each carried. Those white spears were what Deshu coveted most. They actually had one each, which made him envious at a glance. Thinking that he had now joined the Han tribe, he felt a faint thrill of excitement. Meanwhile, the cave entrance was bustling, with the entire tribe gathered there. Seeing you approach, they immediately shouted in unison, "Chief Shu!" The tribe members were instantly drawn by the sound, and when they saw the scene before them, they were all stunned. You, too, were genuinely surprised. You hadn't been away for long, yet the tribe had already undergone such changes. At that moment, the members of the Shu tribe followed you to the open ground outside the cave, and the group was immediately awestruck by the sight before them. Beautiful jars and pots were scattered all over the ground, things they had never seen before, making them too embarrassed to even take out their wooden bowls. Countless fish lay at the cave entrance, along with a massive wild boar, its body pierced with over a dozen holes, weighing at least 1,000 jin. It seemed the hunting team had mastered the use of the long spears, which brought you great relief. Deshu gained a rough understanding of the Han tribe's strength and finally fully believed that in this tribe, they would no longer have to worry about hunger. The children stood on a nearby grassy hill, locked in a standoff with the newly arrived four-horned beasts. That pile is the grass they've been cutting these past few days. Judging by the size of the grass stack, it should be enough to block Malin and the two amnesiac mammoths. When Millen left in the winter, he assigned them to clear the open ground outside the cave. The children did an excellent job. Aside from some newly sprouted grass, there are no longer any shrubs or similar plants left. You quickly inform everyone that these four-horned beasts are domesticated by you and can help with work in the future. Xiao Chu, standing beside you, listens attentively to your words while diligently translating everything. Then you happily reward each of them with 2 rabbit skins, and the children immediately rush off joyfully to find their mothers to make clothes. Not far away, in an open space, a large pile of red bricks has already been stacked. Xuezi reports to you that he fires the kiln every day and even made a tool for the children. As he speaks, he proudly shows it to you. When you see the tool Xuezi presents, you are utterly astonished. It's a simple wooden rake. This guy actually has the potential to be an inventor. You praise Casey a few words and instruct him that he doesn't need to make bricks tomorrow. Instead, he should fire another batch of pottery for the newly arrived tribespeople. Speaking of pottery, the elder nearby also has something to say. A few days ago, the Bald tribe from the west came again to trade for pottery. This time, they paid with a lot of idle time, enough to sustain Hambulo for a long while. After inspecting all the work, you assign tasks for the newly acquired labor. The rabbits are placed in a corner of the cave, inside an enclosure built with stones and yellow mud, where they will spend the winter for now. Among the more than 30 rabbits, 3 are already pregnant. Shortly after being placed in the rabbit pen, they start biting their own fur to build nests. The other rabbits, though only 1 or 2 months old, are already the size of honeydew melons. By next spring, they will become new breeding machines. As for the baby mammoth, it needs no attention. It refuses to leave the side of the grass pile no matter what. The blue mailing are tied to a tree not far from the cave entrance. Tomorrow, someone will be assigned to gather grass for them. By the time all this is done, dinner is almost ready. Before the meal, you specially hold a welcoming ceremony. The tribespeople don't resist the idea of tying up their hair. On the contrary, they find it makes them look more spirited and much neater than leaving their hair loose. Today, a giant boar was hunted, so boar blood is naturally part of the evening meal. Along with wild vegetables, several large pots are stewed. There's also the pheasant you caught today, cooked into a pot of chestnut stew with chicken, a dozen or so freshly grilled fish, and a sweet and sour fruit for each person. This lavish dinner instantly bridges the gap between the old and new tribespeople. Everyone chats and laughs, enjoying the meal heartily. After dinner, you ask the elders in the tribe to help the newcomers make leather boots and have the newcomers learn alongside them. Meanwhile, you take a charred wooden stick and, while deep in thought, draw and write on the cave wall. On the wall is a map of the terrain outside the cave. There's grass, the cave, a small river, and a jungle, along with some things that weren't originally there. Right now, you're thinking about how to plan the open space in front of the cave. This land is nearly 3,600 acres in size. If it were all planted with rice, the tribe would have enough to eat for generations. Of course, planting all of it with rice is impossible. It's important to remember that the area is currently all dry land, and rice must be grown in paddy fields. Transforming this dry land into paddies alone is a massive undertaking. Then there's the issue of housing. With the newly joined members and those born recently, the Han tribe now has 97 people. The current cave is gradually becoming inadequate for living conditions, so in the future, houses will need to be built on this land. Residential areas, rice paddies, vegetable plots, livestock farms, warehouse and pasture bronze wilderness area lumber processing plants. So many facilities need to be placed on this land. It must be carefully planned. The first issue to address is the transformation of the paddy fields. The simple plan is to construct a small square town in the center of the open area. This town will house the residential and farming areas, the warehouse and metal wilderness area, and the lumber processing plant. The entire town is expected to provide living conditions for at least 5,000 people, with a maximum capacity of 8,000 residents. The construction can be completed in phases over several years. Around this 400-meter square town, a moat will be dug. The excavated soil, combined with mud bricks, will be used to build the city walls, providing protection against giant beasts and attacks from outsiders. Then, centered around the moat, an artificial river will be dug, diverting the 8 to 9 meter wide stream from the east. Several return channels will be dug to allow the moat's water to flow back into the stream, forming a vast water network. Small canals will be dug along this network to irrigate the entire area. The planned width for the moat and the artificial river is 4 meters. The stream to the east is 8 to 9 meters wide. Although the water flow remains the same, the narrower channel will double the water speed, making it easier to install water wheels and other hydraulic facilities. The specific plan is to use the cave as the central line, with 200 meters on each side designated for the town's location. To avoid delaying next spring's farming, the first phase of the project will involve digging the 700-meter-long waterway connecting the stream to the moat. The excavated soil will be directly fired into bricks for future construction. The second phase will be the excavation of the moat, but this task is not urgent since the cave is still habitable for now. The third phase will focus on building the city walls. The walls are planned to be trapezoidal, with a base width of 4 meters, a top width of 2 meters, and a height of 5 meters. There will be 4 gates, one on each side. Combined with the 4-meter-wide moat outside, it will be absolutely impenetrable in this era. The fourth phase will involve digging the 700-meter-long return river. The excavated soil will be fired into small bricks for constructing houses and various facilities within the town. The entire project is expected to be completed within 3 years at the latest. Otherwise, there's a fear that the cave will no longer be able to accommodate everyone. The next morning, after all the clanspeople had gathered, you began assigning tasks. There was a lot to do today. Food gathering was completely halted. The newly arrived clanspeople were not yet familiar with the routines, so the students were assigned to continue papermaking. The mischievous children were tasked with bundling grass, following your demonstration to make it easier to store and transport. Big Mouth, Monkey, Big Fur, and Little Fur were sent to the back hill to cut down all the small saplings of the knowledge tree and bring them back to make long fur. The women were divided into 2 teams. The larger team was sent to the valley you had previously visited to gather materials for building horse stables. They took 6 blue marlins carrying large baskets to handle transportation. The smaller gathering team was sent into the jungle to scrape white wax from tree bark. The bark, coated with secretions from white wax insects, is an excellent material for making wax, which will be used to create molds for casting bronze. The remaining men were all assigned to cut down trees. They were to first cut trunks about as thick as a leg for building structures. All branches were to be split into firewood, which you plan to use for making charcoal. For smelting bronze, the more charcoal, the better. Transportation tasks were again assigned to the blue marlins. If they couldn't manage, the baby mammoth would be called upon for help. The clanspeople were puzzled by these arrangements. They believed that autumn was the time to stockpile food. But you explained to them that the food stored now would last until next spring, especially the fish. Many of the fish caught recently were filled with roe. If fishing continued like this, the fish population in the river would inevitably be affected. Therefore, it was necessary to give these fish time to rest and recover. After all the tribespeople had gone out to work, you began to busy yourself. First, you used the available firewood to make some wooden rods. Then, you mixed the kaolin and soil you had brought back to create several crucibles and ladles for purification and alloy making. Next, you used a mixture of refractory clay to craft square molds, allowing you to cast copper and tin plates resembling chocolate bars. Later, you could adjust the copper-tin ratio as needed to produce tools for various purposes. Only after the charcoal and molds were completed did you start building the smelting furnaces. You mixed ordinary clay with some crushed refractory material and added some shredded grass to form mud, which you then piled into cylindrical structures over 40 centimeters in diameter. You built for such furnaces so they could all be fired at once, saving a considerable amount of time. Next, you used python skin to make several simple bellows. Lame Man didn't understand what you were up to, but he was also somewhat eager to see what new things the chief would create this time. Once all your preparations were complete, the world's first set of the most primitive smelting equipment was ready, waiting only for the charcoal to be burned the next day and the furnaces to dry before work could begin. Big Mouth and Monkey, along with the others, had spent the day gathering hundreds more white stalks suitable for making spears. But the adults tasked with cutting trees had it rough. After a grueling day, they had managed to fell fewer than 10 mountain trees, and 3 of their stone axes had shattered in the process. Nevertheless, you mercilessly informed them that they would continue the next day, though whoever performed well would receive new equipment. Everyone was puzzled. The stone axes were already the best tools they had ever seen. What could possibly be better? Their anticipation grew even stronger. After dinner, everyone began their evening entertainment, while you started melting wax by the fireside. Once it solidified, you used a carving knife to shape it into the forms of various tools. Then you tightly wrapped these wax models in clay, leaving only a small opening. After the clay had completely dried, you heated it over the fire and poured out the melted wax inside, resulting in a hollow clay mold. A thin layer of wax remained on the inner walls of the mold, making it easier to remove the castings later. Though a bit more tedious, this method was more precise and didn't waste materials. The poured-out wax could also be remelted into larger blocks for reuse. Early the next morning, the tribespeople led away the blue marlins. Thanks to your persistent efforts in instilling new ideas, they had finally come to understand that wild animals weren't just for eating, they could also help humans carry heavy loads. For people stayed behind. Their task for the day was to operate the bellows for you. The refractory material scholar had prepared the previous day was now fired and ready, so today he was assigned to assist you. Scholar was very clever, so you decided to teach him the method of smelting copper. This kind of work couldn't always be done by you alone. It was better to train an apprentice. By this time, the 4 furnaces had dried. This time, you lit 2 of them. Second brother operated the bellows, while Big Mouth and Monkey loaded charcoal and crushed ore. Under the force of the bellows, flames leaped high from the furnace mouths. Before long, the ore in the furnace began to melt slowly. The molten metal flowed down through the air to the bottom of the furnace, gathering together into lumps of copper mixed with slag. Simultaneously, the tin ore was also being processed nearby, which melted much faster, within just a few minutes under intense heat. Using a branch, you fished out 2 lumps of metal filled with impurities from the ashes at the bottom of the furnace. You repeated this process several times. After about 3 or 4 hours, you had accumulated a pile of impure copper and tin lumps. Then, you lit the remaining 2 furnaces. Once the temperature rose, place the crude copper and miscellaneous tin into 2 separate crucibles. Wait until both the copper and tin have melted into liquid form. Then use a clay ladle to skim off the impurities from the surface. Next, use a pre-prepared ceramic rod to lift out the purified copper leaf and pour it into a grid-patterned clay mold to cool and solidify. The same process is applied to the tin. The lame man and his 4 companions watched as the molten metal slowly solidified. They didn't understand the principles behind it, so they looked quite astonished. They waited until the copper and tin plates were no longer scalding to the touch, then eagerly tipped the metal plates out. It was noon at the time, and the metal plates reflected dazzling rays of light under the sun. Everyone stared at the plates with their mouths agape. They had never seen anything so beautiful and shimmering before. The expressions on their faces were no less mesmerized than modern people gazing upon a gold brick or diamond. Even Chu Bing, who had been playing, was drawn over. He touched one and looked at the other, asking the chief, "What is this?" You ruffled his head and said, "This is called copper and this is called tin. Keep an eye on them while I go fetch something." Chu Bing nodded and, along with the lame man, softly repeated the words copper and tin. Meanwhile, you brought over a pile of tools and molds, ready to begin the bronze casting process. Place copper and tin blocks in proportion. Then you can begin casting. The first batch cast was axes and hammers. As the scorching alloy liquid poured into the molds, white smoke immediately rose from the reserved vent holes. Once the temperature dropped slightly, they eagerly broke open the molds with stones. Inside the shattered clay fragments, a large axe gleaming with a pale golden light lay quietly. The axe head was slightly larger than that of a fire axe. The task of sharpening the axe blade was left to the lame man, while you began preparing to cast other tools. A ruler and a frame saw engraving knives and chisels, blades and a hand drill, as well as a tetrahedral spearhead. By the time the tribespeople returned in the evening, all work had ceased. The golden axe blade, sharpened to a brilliant gleam, was fitted with a handle. The world's first bronze axe was complete. There were also 2 frame saws fitted with wooden handles, one for single-person use and one for 2-person use. When Deshu and the others saw the gleaming golden axe, they immediately crowded around. "What a beautiful axe!" Their eyes were practically glued to it. "And what about this?" You smiled and brought out a spear with a polished head. The tribespeople stared wide-eyed. "Is this still a spear? It's just too beautiful." Especially Shoya and Du Er. When they saw this finely crafted spear, they nearly drooled. "Chief, what about us, the horse tribe?" they eagerly asked. You smiled and took out a piece of chalcopyrite. "Deshu, this is the kind of stone we used. But there's none of this stone left now." The people of the Yuanshu tribe were stunned. They had helped mine this kind of stone before, but they never expected the weapons made from it to be so beautiful. Edit glossary settings. Advanced Mu Tun, the most honest and straightforward among them, said, "If there's not enough, let's go dig for more. We know where it is." You nodded but told them that digging like this would yield too little, and they needed to make some preparations first. "Once we get through this winter, we can bring back a lot. By then, everyone can have a spear like this." The tribespeople calmed down. The chief's words were always trustworthy. If you said everyone would have one, then it was certain. Then, you led them to the logs they had chopped down and taught them how to use the frame saw and hand saw. The two-person frame saw was placed at the end of a log, pulled back and forth. It didn't take long to saw off a circular slice. Then, using the one-handed saw to trim the branches, a side branch as thick as a wrist was cut off in less than a minute. The great axe, over a meter long, felt quite handy to wield. Swinging it allowed them to put their whole body into the effort. If used by the strong men of the Han tribe, even trees as thick as a leg could be felled in just a few chops. Once everyone had learned how to use these tools, you had them go eat and rest. After the meal, the clansmen gathered together to listen to the students recount the training of the children. Meanwhile, you began devising various units of measurement. With standardized units in place, civilization could gradually develop from there. All the sisal had been gathered by now, and the women were focused on weaving ropes. The children crouched outside the rabbit pen, watching as the rabbits inside gave birth. All 3 of the pregnant mother rabbits had delivered, each litter surprisingly numbering 6 or 7. The rabbit population of over 30 had nearly doubled. The students, with their extensive pottery-making experience, were now helping you carve wax molds for the bronze shovel modeled after the sage's original design. This tool could be used for both digging canals and farming. With the template you provided, the students had no trouble imitating it closely. After finishing your own tasks, you began researching the most critical item. You planned to make 2 sizes, a larger one for the Xianxia to use, and a smaller one for the Maling. Soon, both farming and canal digging would benefit from them. The next day, some of the women were twisting hemp ropes, while others were clearing the ground. You had marked off an area earlier and instructed them to clean it thoroughly so construction could begin shortly. For the copper smelting, the lame man and his 4 companions were sufficient for now. The 5 of them were continuously casting copper plates, and whenever they encountered uncertainties with the tin plates, they came to ask. Once the women had finished clearing the area, you led them in setting up the structure. They cut the felled trees into 4-meter lengths to serve as pillars, planting one every 2 meters to form a rectangular enclosure. 2 crossbeams were tied at the gaps for stability, then branches were woven into a fence and attached to the wooden frame. Finally, a layer of mud was applied to complete the work. Inside the wooden enclosure stood a 4-meter-high wooden shed. This would be the little home for the Xianxia calf. After everything was built, the piled-up grass outside was bundled up and stored inside the pen to prevent damage by other animals or predators. Each member of the Han tribe was busy with their duties, the whole place buzzing with activity. Unbeknownst to them, the Xieding tribe had already set their sights on the Han tribe. A crisis was looming. For some time, Xieding had been troubled by a persistent worry. As the weather grew colder, the mountain spring that sustained his tribe was on the verge of drying up. When that happened, they would have to fetch water from a small river 3 kilometers away, which would require a large number of containers for storage. That was why he had personally visited the Han tribe last time to trade, hoping to acquire more pottery. Unfortunately, he hadn't gotten his wish, so he began considering a plan to seize what he wanted by force. In Xieding's view, the Han tribe had fewer than 10 adult men, while his tribe had 15. Moreover, since his last visit to the Han tribe, he had crafted spears with stone tips. Defeating them and seizing their pottery and food shouldn't be a problem. That morning, Xieding gathered all the adult men from his tribe. Each armed with a spear, they marched grandly toward the Han tribe, intent on first crushing the Han hunting party and then raiding their settlement to plunder everything they could. Meanwhile, in the dense forest along the ridge, Deshu and Shoya were still felling trees. They worked swiftly that day. With 3 large axes and 2 long saws, they could produce a clean log roughly every half hour, and that was just the pace of one team. The logging party consisted of 10 men, divided into 3 groups, so essentially, every half hour, 3 trees were felled simultaneously. The remaining person was responsible for transporting the timber. Now he was leading the horsetails to chop trees while they grazed nearby. Just then, a group of people suddenly appeared running from the mountain opposite Red Valley, each carrying a long spear. Mutant immediately shouted toward the ridge, then quickly pulled Lon Matling and ran back. Hearing the shout, everyone immediately stopped their work, and the super weapons were prepared for battle. Mutant, leading 6 blue horsetails, fled in a frantic dash, while Xianxia and his men chased closely behind. When they reached the ridge, accompanied by several whooshing sounds, the 2 horsetails at the rear were struck by the long spears, let out a sharp cry, and fell to the ground. The other 4, still tied to them, continued to run wildly, dragging the corpses of their 2 companions all the way toward the Han tribe's grassy mountain. The robust Han tribesmen, hidden behind trees, drew food axes from their waists and threw them. With a few whooshing sounds, 3 enemies instantly fell to the ground, and 2 others were injured, leaving only 10 still advancing. This was something Xianxia hadn't anticipated. He thought that, with so many men, the enemy would be frightened and flee. How dare they fight back? Xianxia was utterly enraged. He immediately gave the order to throw spears again. But as soon as the 10 spears flew out, Dashu and the others hid behind the trees once more, and all the long spears landed obliquely in the ground. Seeing this, Duer and his men emerged from behind the trees again, and 9 long spears flew out simultaneously. 4 more of Xianxia's tribesmen fell instantly. Fortunately, the others quickly hid behind trees, and Duer and his men retreated behind the trees again, awaiting the enemy's next attack. But no sound came for a long time. They didn't know that Xianxia was already terrified. The enemy before him was too fearsome, and he realized the Han tribe had more people than he expected. Now only 8 of his men remained, 2 of whom were injured. Continuing the fight was impossible. He immediately led the remaining men to flee toward the dragon cave. Meanwhile, Xiaotsubing was leading you in front of 2 Kongxiangs, naming them. The larger one was named Gray Mountain, and the smaller one Meat Leopard. Just as you were about to say something, Gray Mountain looked west and suddenly let out a roar. Caught off guard, Xiaotsubing was startled. You immediately looked westward and saw 4 blue horsetails dragging the corpses of 2 companions, running toward you. Several long spears were embedded in the bodies of the 2 horsetails, but there was no sign of the logging team following behind. Your heart sank with alarm. You quickly called all the tribesmen to hide in the cave, forbidding anyone to come out until you returned. After arranging everything, you took your bow and arrows and the golden-headed spear, mounted Gray Mountain, and headed west. Meat Leopard immediately followed. Following the trail of blood left by the horsetails, Gray Mountain carried you at a gallop. Soon you entered the forest. A group of people suddenly appeared ahead with the leaders carrying gold. It was unmistakably Dashu and the others. You were stunned. What was going on? Everyone was here, and no one seemed injured. Xia immediately brought the hunting team to your side and recounted the entire situation. Listening to his account, you couldn't help but feel puzzled. Why did Xianxia and his men attack your tribe? But whatever the reason, anyone who dared harm your tribesmen must pay the price, even if it was just the horsetails. You immediately raised your spear and led the logging team to attack Xianxia's tribe. It wasn't until around 2 p.m. that afternoon that you reached Xianxia's tribe. But the open space in front of the cave entrance was completely empty. The cave mouth was blocked by a massive boulder, though there was still a sizable gap. Several pairs of eyes were secretly watching from outside. Baldy was among them. What he feared most was the enemy coming for revenge. As luck would have it, his fears came true. They had indeed arrived. And with such a formidable lineup. The leader, holding a gleaming spear with a sharp tip, rode a long-trunked beast taller than a man. At that moment, Baldy was filled with immense regret. If only he had known how powerful the enemy was, why even bother fighting? You also noticed the several pairs of eyes peeking out from the cave. Immediately, you took the longbow from your back, drew the string, and knocked an arrow. The next moment, a sharp cry was heard. Baldy was shot through the eye, the arrowhead protruding from the back of his skull. Strong arm, stony, 6 fingers. Go push that rock away, you commanded, pointing at the massive boulder blocking the cave entrance. The 3 immediately stepped forward and began pushing the boulder. Even with all 3 of them exerting their strength, the boulder barely budged. Instead, it slowly started to push back. Think blocking the entrance will save you? You sneered, stepping up to the gap and striking again. Behind the boulder, several grown men were desperately holding it in place, their faces contorted with effort. You swiftly thrust your spear again. This time, 2 men behind the boulder were pierced straight through. The others, seeing this, fled in terror, no longer daring to stand near the entrance. With the resistance gone, Strong Arm and the other two easily pushed the boulder aside. The three lifeless bodies behind the rock, not yet cold, were crushed into a bloody pulp, their last breaths extinguished in an instant. The cave entrance now lay wide open, revealing a dim, yellowish firelight inside. A group of women and children huddled together in a pile of straw, trembling with fear. Of the remaining 5 adult men, 3 stood in front of them holding spears, while the other 2, previously injured, lay moaning in the straw. You stepped inside, spear in hand, with Big Tree and the others following closely behind, golden axes at the ready. The 3 men holding spears, seeing the fierce and imposing group, trembled uncontrollably, babbling what seemed to be pleas for mercy. "Since when do people beg for mercy with weapons in hand?" You scoffed. With a single sweep of your spear, you knocked all 3 of their weapons to the ground. One of the injured men in the back quietly picked up a rock, still thinking of resisting. In an instant, your spear shot forward. With a thud, it pierced straight through his left chest, leaving a gaping hole. "On your knees, all of you. Resist and you die!" You roared, your eyes blazing with fury. Everyone's legs immediately gave way, and they dropped to their knees. "Big Tree, go gather all the food they've stored and take it with us," you ordered, then turned your gaze to the kneeling crowd. "It was your leader who attacked me first, so don't blame me. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have come for you. Your true intention was to absorb these people, but to prevent resentment, you shifted the blame entirely onto their leader. However, you had clearly overestimated their loyalty to the tribe. They didn't care about their leader's death, only that you were taking their food." The group of women watched anxiously as Big Tree and his men carried away their stored meat, on the verge of tears, and hurriedly begged you, "Please, don't take our food. Without it, we won't survive the winter." You looked at them calmly. "If you join my tribe, you'll have more than enough to eat. No one will freeze to death in the winter again. Those willing to join us can stand up now." As soon as the words left your mouth, one person quickly rose and moved behind you. Slowly, a second, then a third, and a fourth followed. Before long, only one severely injured man remained lying on the ground. From the look of him, he wasn't going to make it. You had no intention of saving him. Leading the new members of your tribe out of the cave, you instructed Fongtooth to burn the cavern down. In that moment, flames erupted inside the cave, and Baldy and his tribe were wiped from existence. Upon returning to the Han tribe, the integration of newcomers proceeded smoothly. Among the tribe were several members previously acquired through trade with Baldhead, and they quickly bonded with the others. You hadn't deceived them either. The Han tribe's food reserves were indeed plentiful. With the addition of the 200 captives from the recent raid, there would be no issue feeding everyone through the winter. However, the cave's capacity had reached its limit. Fortunately, winter was approaching, and crowding together would only mean more warmth. What astonished these newcomers was that the Han tribe actually raised wild beasts, especially impressive ones like Robao and Huishan. This gave them a profound understanding of the Han tribe's strength. Now, they felt immense pride in having become members of the Han tribe. The women had been busy twisting ropes these past few days, and the cave was already piled high with several large bundles. The men continued felling trees, using the trunks as building materials and the branches as firewood for the kills. You hadn't been idle either, crafting each necessary woodworking tool one by one and then casting 50 bronze shovels. With digging tools now available, your first phase water channel project had to commence with both labor and construction. Using an exceptionally long hemp rope woven by the women as a measuring tape, you first marked the position due north of the cave where the beam would initially be erected, then buried a log at each of the 4 corners of the planned city site as markers, thereby determining the optimal course for the canal. Next came building the brick kiln. Once the canal excavation began, it would generate large amounts of soil, so you planned to proceed with both digging and brick molding simultaneously. Since you intended to fire blue bricks, which require substantial water in the firing process, the kiln was situated by the small river for easy water access. Shuezi had previously fired many red bricks, which were now perfectly used to construct a cylindrical brick kiln. Mobilizing the entire tribe's labor force, it took a full 5 days to complete. Additional time was spent making brick molds, finally completing the preparatory work. It was then that the plow you had spent days crafting was finally unveiled. A wooden frame 2 meters wide, fitted with 4 bronze plowshares. Once this contraption was put to use, it could turn over a 2-meter wide strip of land at a time, reaching a depth of 40 centimeters. As for the power to operate this device, it naturally fell to Robao and Huishan. With two plows side by side, they pulled the plow forward, turning over the entire 4-meter-wide canal bed behind them. In less than an hour, the two beasts had plowed a 700-meter-long stretch of the canal to a depth of 40 centimeters. Seeing this, you were overjoyed. At this rate, perhaps your city construction plan wouldn't take 3 years after all. Human labor could now begin as well, filling molds with the mud from the excavation, compacting it into individual brick adobes, and leaving them to air dry. You planned to delay the brick firing until winter, when everyone would be idle with little to do. Moreover, firing the kiln in winter would provide warmth, making it a pleasant task. However, a problem arose. Since these bricks were intended for constructing the city walls, each brick was quite large, which would waste considerable time transporting both the mud and the bricks. Thus, you decided to immediately start building a simple cart. Initiating a new project naturally meant finding assistants first. They could later become the tribe's specialized carpenters. Within the Han tribe, the most talented carpenter was undoubtedly Mutong, who, back in the tree tribe, had figured out how to use hot charcoal to burn a hollow in a log. The other was the honest and steady Muduan, who usually kept to himself but was exceptionally diligent in his work. Drawing on your past life memories of carts and adapting them, the three of you spent an entire day creating the first handcart. The engineering team will soon put it to use. The tribespeople are very interested in this newly introduced means of transport. Compared to carrying loads on shoulders or by hand, it indeed saves a lot of effort. However, you are not optimistic. You notice that the small cart constantly wobbles left and right when turning. If this continues, it will undoubtedly break down soon. Having identified the problem, you immediately set about making improvements, primarily by widening the wheels. After clearly explaining the task to your two assistants, the three of you get even busier. This round of improvements is much faster than the initial cart building process. 2 hours later, the second-generation small cart is ready for testing. This time, the cart no longer wobbles from side to side, and everyone's work efficiency immediately improves. As a result, this second model is designated as the mass production version and begins to be manufactured in batches. The first batch will produce 30 units. With dozens of adult laborers, both men and women, there is certainly a need for these wheelbarrows specifically for hauling soil. They will undoubtedly be used extensively in the future. Over the following period, the carpenter trio equips the engineering team at a rate of 3 small carts every 2 days. The first phase of the water channel project progresses rapidly. Even the previously slow brick-making work speeds up significantly as more small carts are put into use. By the 18th day of construction, a long trench measuring 698 meters in length and 4 meters in depth appears before you. At this point, you halt the digging work. The remaining 2 meters will be excavated only when water diversion is needed. The tribespeople return to their normal routines. The men continue logging to stockpile materials for future construction, while the women resume gathering food, believing that more food is always better. The production of the 30 small carts is also completed. To facilitate large-scale extraction in the future, you are now guiding the construction of wooden barrels and carts that can be pulled by horses. With the experience gained from the previous 2 manufacturing efforts, you provide them with the design for a 4-wheeled cart and let them work on it independently. As for you, you devote your time to crafting farming tools. Everyone is busily and orderly engaged in their respective tasks. One crisp morning, as you step out of the cave, the first thing you see is a vast expanse of white. The long-awaited winter has finally arrived. Snowflakes as large as goose feathers fall incessantly, and the sky remains overcast, with no sign of when the snowfall will end. The men's logging work comes to a halt, and they all stay huddled in the cave. The women no longer clamor to gather food, only occasionally stepping out to feed the horses some hay. Meatbun and Huishan don't need to be fed. You're afraid they might pull down the shed, so you've released them from the pen. The two immediately dash outside, frolicking joyfully in the snow. Brickmaking is certainly not feasible in such weather. It will have to wait until the snow stops. So you begin a long-planned initiative, popularizing Mandarin and writing. In fact, the Han tribe members have already mastered some vocabulary, especially Tsubing, who can now speak some simple phrases. This makes things much easier. You only need to teach everyone some essential vocabulary and show them how to string the words together. As for Chinese characters, teaching them simplified characters at this stage is impractical. Clerical script, which is closest to pictographs, is more easily accepted. Being able to write isn't as important. The key is to recognize the characters. To boost everyone's enthusiasm for learning, you establish a rule. Lessons will be reviewed once every day before dinner. Those who cannot read will have their dinner portions halved, while those who perform well will receive rewards such as syrup-roasted chestnuts. This strategy proves effective. All the tribe's people become highly enthusiastic, especially the children. After class, they spontaneously gather in small groups to practice. A few days later, the snow finally stops, and the brick-making plan officially resumes. After you personally demonstrate the process for 2 kills, you can leave it to the clansmen to handle. They don't need to work every day anyway. Most of the time was spent loading the kiln and carrying out the finished bricks, while the rest was dedicated to firing and cooling. Days passed like this, one after another, learning Chinese characters every day and moving bricks every few days. It was simple yet fulfilling. When people weren't busy, they would make accessories to decorate themselves, with men being the majority. They adorned themselves with bone necklaces, feathers, and all sorts of trinkets. At first, you didn't understand why, but later, the elder explained that to prevent inbreeding and the degeneration of their people, many tribes would gather in spring for matchmaking events. If a woman took a liking to a man, she would follow him back to his tribe. The criteria for liking someone were based on strength, the tribe's power, and the availability of food. This could be observed through the accessories a man wore. For instance, carrying a particularly large thigh bone as a weapon indicated that his tribe had the ability to hunt large beasts, which naturally meant they wouldn't lack food. This reasoning made some sense and gave you an idea. You felt that you, too, were missing something. The traditional bone necklaces didn't appeal to you, so after some thought you decided to create hair clasps. Hair clasps were typically made of gold, silver, jade, or leather, and using different materials for different people would signify status. Since ancient times, gold had symbolized nobility, but the Han tribe had no gold. So, your hair clasp was made of hollowed-out bronze with a Chinese character engraved on it. Not wanting your tribesmen to go without adornments, you made a silver hair clasp for Dashu using tin, engraved with the pattern of a tree. Dashu loved it. Under your guidance, other adult men also crafted hair clasps from various materials, animal hide, wood, and even hairpins. From then on, a new rule was established in the Han tribe. Children could only tie their hair up or wear hair clasps but were not allowed to use hairpins. Adult men, however, had to wear hair clasps with hairpins to distinguish them from minors. Women were no longer limited to ponytails. Adult women were required to wear their hair in buns, using wooden combs or hairpins as ornaments. Underage girls could wear ponytails, leave their hair loose, or braid it, also using hairpins for decoration. As metal was a strategic resource, it couldn't be used for accessories by everyone. So, you decided to award metal ornaments as incentives to those who made contributions to the tribe. Through these reforms, one could now easily identify a person's status, age, and whether they had contributed to the tribe just by looking at their headwear. You also made a hair clasp for Tubing, wood wrapped in python skin with a bronze mouthpiece engraved with cloud patterns. It was awarded to him for being the fastest learner of Chinese characters, making him the first child in the tribe to own a metal accessory. He was overjoyed and would often touch the bronze mouthpiece on his head. In truth, your efforts in promoting accessories weren't just about distinguishing social classes within the tribe. The main goal was the upcoming matchmaking event, not to find a partner for yourself, but to meet other tribes and explore potential trade opportunities. Previously, the Han tribe had relied on trade with the Bal tribe for salt, but now that the Bal tribe was gone, you needed to find new suppliers before locating salt mines. The Han tribe's pottery was highly valuable, and you aimed to trade it not only for salt but also to buy more people. Relying on the current population of fewer than 200 to reproduce would never be enough to fill a city, even in several lifetimes. However, not all tribes were as fortunate as the Han tribe, which never had to worry about food. Still able to think during leisure time about the major taboos for his tribe's development, for example, the Black Rat tribe to the east of the Han tribe. This was a medium-sized tribe with over 150 people. They had one significant difference from the Han tribe. The Black Rat tribe had their own beliefs. They worshipped black rats and also had specialized houses for communicating with spirits. This winter, the Black Rat house claimed to have received divine guidance that their stored food wouldn't last until next spring, so he ordered the chieftain to lead a hunting team out to find food. Thus, the Black Rat tribe's chieftain, Rat Tyrant, went out hunting with 19 followers. Soon they noticed something strange at the western edge of their tribal forest. Intermittent wisps of black smoke would appear that was definitely intentionally lit by humans. But when did people appear to the west? Long ago they had reached the western forest edge, but that 8 to 9 meter wide river was beyond their ability to cross, so they hadn't ventured that far since now the smoke appeared to be right near the river. Rat Big immediately reported this to the Black Rat house, who wasn't too surprised but rather became very interested in these people's fire use in the black rat houses. Understanding fire was mainly for cooking food. Frequent fires meant they must have abundant food. If it was for warmth, why didn't they keep it burning continuously? Rat Wu was puzzled, so he ordered Rat Big to take some men to investigate. If possible, they could attempt to trade with them. Maybe they could even learn something. Thus Uncle Big set out with his team on this diplomatic mission. Meanwhile, at the Han tribe side, Wooden Barrel and Six Fingers were guarding the brick kiln, occasionally checking the fire inside every now and then throwing in more firewood. The two had been burning it since last night until this afternoon. By now, the bricks inside were glowing red hot. It was time to flood the kiln and seal it. Wooden Barrel patted Six Fingers, telling him to return to the cave to gather workers. Six Fingers nodded, climbed up the slope to ground level, and headed straight for the cave without looking back. But during this period, when Wooden Barrel was alone, shouts came from above ground, followed by the sound of Meat Bun running, then human yelling sounds. Wooden Barrel quickly climbed up from the underground firing port. As soon as his head emerged, he saw over a dozen spears flying toward Meat Bun. Terrified, he sprinted straight toward the cave. You were just preparing to take people to flood the kiln when upon exiting the cave you saw Meat Bun being chased. Rat Big and others initially wanted to pursue, but suddenly saw you emerging with a group from the cave and immediately froze. Holy shit! Who dares attack my Meat Bun? Everyone grab your weapons. The tribespeople, hearing their leader's command, immediately rushed out with 70 to 80 people, each holding weapons, directly surrounding Rat Big's group. Rat Big stood with mouth agape facing a group of fierce-looking people. The leading young man looked stern, wearing a golden crown with hairpin, holding a gleaming bronze spear glaring at him. The lineup behind was even more dazzling, each holding shining bronze shovels. Right beside you stood Strong Stone and Six Fingers, each holding bronze axes. Even those without bronze weapons each carried a gleaming spear. Forget about combat effectiveness, just this impressive formation alone was enough to make Uncle Big's group freeze in fear. Meat Bun, seeing his boss had control of the situation, came trotting back, happily standing behind you. The dog, relying on its master's authority, let out a fierce bark at Rat. You patted its nose, signaling it to calm down, then turned to Rat and said, "This beast is ours. Why did you attack it?" Rat was utterly bewildered. You seemed quite familiar with this monster, and he hadn't expected the neighboring tribe to be capable of controlling such a massive creature. But what shocked him even more was when Huishan, even larger than Robao, heard the commotion and came running over. Standing beside Robao, Huishan curiously eyed the surrounded group. Rat and his gang were terrified out of their wits. Holy crap, there's another one. They all wore stunned expressions. Frowning, you motioned for the elder beside you to go ask who they were and why they had come to your territory. The elder stepped forward and, with a mix of gestures and translation, conveyed your words and introduced you as the tribe's leader. Upon hearing the elder's explanation, Rat immediately apologized profusely, explaining that he hadn't known the beast had an owner and had only intended to hunt it for winter provisions. Finally, with tears streaming down his face, he revealed his true purpose for coming. You hadn't expected them to be here to trade for food. Still, if they had something that caught your eye, it might not be a bad idea. So, what do you have to exchange? You asked. Rat hesitated for a moment. Would stone basins work? After all, his tribe had several, and stone basins were essential items for every tribe, truly in high demand. Before you could even respond, the elder spoke up. Our tribe already has stone basins. If you want some, you can trade for them with other items. Even riverbank laborers will do. Now it was Rat's turn to be dumbfounded. The other tribe not only had plenty of stone basins but was even willing to trade them. Seeing Rat's hesitation, the elder called a few children to bring out a set of pottery. Within 2 minutes, the children returned carrying a water jar, a pot, and several bowls. Some mischievous kids, eager to stir up trouble, even stood at the cave entrance noisily slurping bowls of meat soup. Rat stared in disbelief. He had never smelled such an aroma before. You had someone serve him a bowl of meat soup, reasoning that without tasting it, he wouldn't understand the true value of pottery. Rat carefully took the bowl and, imitating the children, took a tentative slurp. Instantly, warmth spread from his throat to his stomach, and soon his entire body felt cozy. This meat soup was specially brewed by you for cold weather. Though it didn't contain much meat, it was made with pork bones and chili peppers. A couple of sips on an ordinary day brought immense comfort. By now, Rat was completely won over by the flavor of the meat soup and immediately decided to trade laborers for pottery. As for what strictness meant, he had never even heard of it. The elder quoted the previous trading price for pottery. 1 pottery item in exchange for 2 underage boys or 1 adult woman. Rat found this price acceptable, but he hadn't brought any women or children on this trip. Desperate to take back a pot, he shamelessly asked if he could take the pot now and bring the people later. You were instantly displeased. Extending credit was out of the question, never in this lifetime. What if they reneged? You'd end up looking like a fool. Seeing your refusal, Rat quickly retrieved a leather pouch made from an animal femur from one of his underlings and handed it to you. This contains food. It's not much, but I hope you'll let us take a pottery basin for now. Next time, we'll repay you with people. Would I be short on such meager provisions? You retorted dismissively, carelessly opening the pouch and glancing inside. But the next moment, your eyes widened in shock. What the? Isn't this peanuts? Instantly, a flurry of thoughts about peanuts crossed my mind. Stir-fried peanuts, boiled peanuts in salt water, deep-fried peanuts, and peanut butter, which was truly a remarkable thing. Not only were peanuts highly nutritious, but most importantly, they could be pressed for oil. If I could cultivate a large field of them, we would never lack for cooking oil again. Moreover, with oil we could make soap, candles, and even explosives. So, calling peanuts a strategic resource was no exaggeration. Suppressing my excitement, it took me quite a while to regain my composure. Where did you get these? I asked. Rat Chief chattered and gestured wildly, and I finally understood. Their tribe's so-called deity was a black cat and mice, and the peanuts were dug out from mouse burrows. They knew exactly where to find mouse holes that stored peanuts, so peanuts were nothing rare in their tribe. Xianxia nodded, casually pulling out a large basket. You can trade pottery with a basket of peanuts like this, but they must be undamaged and with their shells intact. Rat Chief could hardly believe that I would offer such favorable terms and eagerly agreed, promising to bring more next time. In the end, Rat Chief left with the large basket, a clay pot, a clay bowl, and a spoon I had gifted them. Watching their retreating figures, I suddenly felt a wave of unease. This time, an unfamiliar tribe had managed to sneak up to the entrance of our cave. Fortunately, they weren't too numerous. If they had come specifically to attack the Han tribe, even if we could fend them off, there might have been casualties. I had previously planned for defensive structures, but building such a large wall wasn't something that could be done overnight. During this vulnerable period, we needed to establish a reliable defensive fortification first. I instructed Big Tree to take some people to water the brick kiln, while I stood at the cave entrance, lost in thought. The brick kiln had been firing for 2 months and had already produced a large stock of finished bricks. Construction of the main wall was scheduled to begin next spring, so for now, these bricks were just sitting idle. With that in mind, a simple and quick defensive plan formed in my head. Early the next morning, I gathered all the adults and explained that we would build 3 walls to enclose the cave, leaving a 2-meter-wide gate on the eastern side. The entrance would be secured with a 3-meter-high wooden gate reinforced with 4 layers of long spikes. This simple wall would be constructed directly from the green bricks. In such cold weather, pouring water over the stacked bricks would bind them together. Once spring arrived and the weather warmed, these bricks could still be used for the main wall without any loss of utility. Over the next few days, all the adults in the tribe worked together. With the help of carts and various tools, the wall rose at a visibly rapid pace. Meanwhile, in the Black Rat tribe, Rat Chief was using the clay pot to cook meat stew and recounting the experiences and gains from their diplomatic mission to the elder. The more Black Rat elder listened, the more excited he became, a glint of gold flashing unconsciously in his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking at that moment, but he decided to accompany Rat Chief on the next trip. Back in the Han tribe, the temporary wall was completed. Standing 3 meters high and nearly half a meter thick, it was sturdy enough to withstand any human assault. With the simple ice brick wall in place, it was time to prepare defensive weapons. Previously, tribesmen had mostly used bronze shovels as weapons. While they could serve as weapons, they were only effective in close combat, which often led to casualties. Ranged weapons were the key to minimizing losses. After much consideration, I concluded that javelins were the most reliable option. A single hit would almost certainly be fatal, allowing us to inflict significant damage on the enemy before they could close in. Previously, the Han tribe's javelins were made of wood. The penetration power isn't enough and they don't last long. But you still have hundreds of pounds of gold and silver plates. You just need to add metal tips to the wooden spears. And making these tips is very simple. You first make one by hand, then leave the rest to wooden barrel and wooden pile. The other tribesmen help with the installation. By the 4th day, 260 new-style spears had been produced. Now, with the wall and the spears, you finally feel somewhat confident. As long as the attackers don't exceed 20 people, the 60-plus adults of the Han tribe could eliminate all the enemies with just one volley of spears. That day also happened to be when the brick kiln was being watered and sealed. There wasn't a single person outside the wall. Just then, Shuda led his tribesmen across the small river, but they couldn't find the Han tribe's cave. Where there had been empty land just days before, a bluish-white ice wall now stood abruptly. Shuda rushed quickly to the ice wall. This wall hadn't been here a few days ago. It seemed to have sprung out of the ground. The tribesmen behind him caught up, staring at the identical large blue bricks on the wall. They couldn't help but exclaim, "This is nothing short of a miracle." Meat Bun, who had been playing inside the wall, was drawn by the noise outside. He scurried behind the sturdy horse at the gate and peered out. Seeing the same group of people who had stabbed him with spears last time, he immediately stuck his snout out and roared. Only then did Shuda notice that there was a gate in the wall, made of a wooden frame with sharp wooden spikes facing outward. Although he didn't know what it was for, he could imagine enemies charging in and being impaled by the spikes, and he couldn't help but marvel at the ingenuity. The women and boys, meanwhile, were wondering why the Han tribe hadn't eaten the four-horned beast from earlier. How much meat would that have been? Just then, hearing Meat Bun's roar, you led a dozen tribesmen out of the cave, each carrying a new-style spear. Shuda quickly explained that he had come to trade for pottery this time. He pulled the women and children forward for you to see. You nodded, then instructed your men to move the sturdy horse aside. Once Shuda and his group entered, they were instantly stunned by the scene before them. Next to the animal pen, 30 identical small carts were parked. Beside the cave entrance stood 50 bronze shovels and over 200 spears. Rows of gleaming spear tips shone brightly. At the cave entrance, the gate to the pen was still open. The blue horse inside, grazing, saw the strangers and immediately began neighing loudly. Shuda and his people were startled. So besides those two monsters, the Han tribe had even more animals, and they all lived in houses. By the time they reached the inside of the cave, Shuda and his group still hadn't recovered from their shock. Instead, they were even more astonished. A quick glance around showed that the Han tribe was definitely no smaller than the Black Rat tribe. While the Han tribesmen were sizing up Shuda and his people, Shuda was staring dumbfounded at the 80 or so pottery jars by the fire pit. How many were there? Enough to trade for their entire tribe back. A few women from the Black Rat tribe, however, were focused on the Han tribe's women. They all had rosy complexions, clearly well-fed, and each had animal skins to wear. Only the Black Rat tribe's shaman had the sharpest eye, staring intently at the hundreds of Chinese characters on the cave wall. Seeing the old man's interest in the characters, you didn't disturb him. You told the elder to proceed with the trade with Shuda. This time, Shuda had brought 7 women, 6 boys around 11 or 12 years old, and 4 baskets of peanuts. He wanted to trade for 10 pottery jars and 4 pottery bowls. After obtaining the pottery, Shuda was overjoyed. Now his tribesmen could also enjoy warm, hearty meat soup. But what made them even happier was that these boys and girls being traded could see how powerful the Han tribe appeared. The thought of being like everyone else here in the future, never going hungry again, made them a little excited. As soon as Shu Wu saw the trade was completed, he hurried over to you and asked what those Han characters were. His intuition told him those symbols were highly advanced. Seeing his interest, you picked up a small stick and carefully explained numbers to him. Only then did he understand that those symbols were another form of expression for the Han tribe's language. If everyone could learn these symbols, couldn't they write some symbols for others to see, and others would know what they meant? You had no idea what the old man was thinking, but seeing him deep in thought, you didn't disturb him. Although the Han tribe members studied Han characters every day, they only did it for the sake of those syrup-roasted chestnuts. Finding someone who could ponder and reflect on their own like this was a rare find. For a moment, you felt a sense of appreciation for talent. Even though this was just a member of another tribe, you took the initiative to invite Shu Wu and Shuda to stay overnight, suggesting they could leave the next day. Shu Wu readily accepted your invitation. He had many questions he wanted to discuss with you. To show your welcome, you announced an extra meal for the day, adding lunch to the schedule. However, space inside the cave was a bit tight. If everyone lay down to sleep, there definitely wouldn't be enough room. So, you decided to move the rabbit enclosure to the open space outside the cave, freeing up some space inside. After selecting the location, you had your tribesmen start work immediately, building 4 walls with green bricks and paving the entire ground. Then, they spread a thick layer of hay, effectively completing the enclosure. The women moved all 50-plus rabbits to the new enclosure outside. Shu Wu took the initiative to ask why you didn't just kill the rabbits. After all, they were food. Before you could answer, Shu jumped in to explain, detailing your purpose in raising rabbits. He had witnessed the first breeding of the rabbits himself, how they went from just over 30 to more than 50 in no time. Raising rabbits now was far easier than hunting them in the past. The people of the Black Rat tribe were astonished upon hearing this. The logic of breeding was simple, and they understood it completely. They just hadn't expected there could be such a way to store food. As for Shu Wu, he had his own quiet suspicions about the many wonders of the Han tribe. He quietly pulled you aside and whispered, "Who told you all these things? What are they to your tribe?" You straightforwardly told him that your tribe had no gods. You were born knowing these things. Hearing this, Shu Wu's gaze toward you instantly changed. Could it be that you were something? Ignoring his strange look, you led the group to see the paddy fields that were about to be developed, proudly telling him that by next year, you would have more than enough food. Shuda, hearing this, was somewhat puzzled. Although your tribe had more people than his, even they couldn't possibly eat that much food. After wandering around for so long, he finally asked the key question. Smiling, you told him that you didn't invite other tribes to join the Han tribe. You wanted more people to become your tribesmen. Shuda found this answer rather unconvincing. No tribe would willingly join another outright. With a light laugh, you called Shu to your side and had him recount their experiences. Because Shu had personally lived through the invasion by the cannibals, his storytelling made them feel as if they were right there in the moment. Shuda broke out in a cold sweat, never imagining such a tribe existed. He was grateful his own tribe hadn't encountered them. Seeing the timing was ripe, you dropped another bombshell. That cannibal tribe was just across the river. They had many adult men, and every time they appeared, there were no fewer than 50 of them. There were also many others. A giant monster with a nose as big as a mountain might be lurking not far from your tribe. I hope you all stay cautious. After saying all this, you patted Shuda's shoulder, turned around, and went back inside the wall. But both Shu Wu and Shuda were terrified by the news. Learning that the cannibals were near their tribe, how could they stay peacefully as guests in the Han tribe? They immediately went to bid you farewell, saying they needed to return and prepare their defenses. Since they were leaving, there was no need to keep them. You gifted them 10 large fish as provisions for the journey. As they departed, you told Shu Wu, "If you encounter danger, you can come here for help." Shu Wu and Shuda were deeply moved, expressing their gratitude repeatedly, before hurrying back to their tribe with their people. With the group's departure, the Han tribe returned to peace once more. Just one day before the third full moon of winter, a heavy snowfall lasted a day and a night, leaving a 30-centimeter thick layer of snow on the open ground. Brickmaking work was forced to halt. That day you were lying on a haystack in the barn, holding Meat Bun and Gray Mountain, who lay on either side of you, stealing a few grains when you weren't paying attention. Just then, Gray Mountain suddenly lifted its head, flapping its large ears as it listened to movements in the distance. Sensing something unusual, you immediately stopped and listened. In less than a minute, a violent tremor came from the ground. You rushed out of the barn, climbed the western wall, and observed the situation. A hunting party composed of numerous fierce carnivorous beasts was desperately chasing a herd of herbivores across the snow. Fleeing for their lives at the front were not only a herd of wild cattle you had never seen before but also giant elk, which you had only ever seen in museums. Trapped in the middle of the herd were even dozens of legendary creatures, grass mud horses, also known as alpacas. The pursuers behind them included tall terror birds and packs of wild boars. But in this hunting party, they were merely minor players adding to the chaos. The true main force of this army was a pack of over 200 gray wolves. Crouching behind the wall, you hardly dared to breathe, carefully observing the scene outside. Gray Mountain and Meat Bun lay quietly beside you, watching the spectacle unfold. With the large hunting party hot on their heels, the lead bull guided over 100 of his followers, frantically fleeing toward the northeast. The alpha wolf leading the pack let out a howl, and over 100 hungry wolves swiftly broke away from the gray wolf army, sweeping like the wind to flank the cattle herd. Sensing impending disaster, the alpacas in the fleeing herd ran especially fast, charging ahead of the cattle and taking the lead in this life-or-death escape. Not to be outdone, over 60 giant elk sprinted closely behind the alpacas on their long legs. The lead bull was furious. If not for the protection of the cattle herd, those dozens of alpacas would have been killed long ago. Now, with disaster looming, they were the first to flee. At this critical moment, the lead bull suddenly noticed the alpacas ahead had vanished. Shortly after, the elk running at the front disappeared as well. Over 20 bulls continued to run, but as they were about to catch up to the elk, the scene before them made the hair on their bodies stand on end. Since when was there such a deep, long trench here? You were overjoyed at the sight. You never expected that the artificial river dug to transform the paddy fields would serve such a purpose. This was truly a stroke of luck, like manna from heaven. Now, the lead bull was going insane. There was no way to cross this trench. He had no choice but to halt abruptly, lining up with the others, turning their sharp horns outward. The wolves, snarling and baring their fangs, closed in step by step. The gradually shrinking encirclement at this tense moment when a great battle was about to erupt. A loud farting sound broke the pre-battle deadlock. Both the buffalo herd and the wolf pack froze. Hundreds of pairs of curious eyes simultaneously turned toward the western wall. There, they saw a two-legged creature wearing a golden crown slapping the head of a mammoth beside him repeatedly. "Damn it! I told you not to steal the chestnuts. Now you've doomed us all." The eyes of the buffalo herd watching this way suddenly lit up, because there was no trench near that wall. The eyes of the wolf pack also gleamed, for they had discovered prey easier to catch than the buffalo. Suddenly noticing the unusual behavior in their eyes, you immediately dashed toward the cave, shouting as you ran, "Grab your weapons and guard the cave in trance." The wall was no longer reliable. A half-meter thick, 3-meter-high brick wall was sufficient for defending against human attacks, but against a herd of frenzied wild buffalo, it was another matter. The buffalo herd paid no heed to your words and launched a breakout, charging directly in your direction. Seeing the buffalo herd breaking through, the alpha wolf of the pack urgently commanded its subordinates to drive the wild boars, organizing the first wave of countercharge. The boars immediately rushed to the front. This was an unavoidable necessity. With fewer numbers than the others yet eager to claim a share of the hunt, they had no choice but to serve as the wolf pack's vanguard. The birds, however, were different. They lingered on the periphery, seizing advantages when available and fleeing when there were none. Now, with a path to survival right before them, how could the buffalo herd retreat? An unprecedented collision, like Mars crashing into Earth, erupted. Over 100 wild buffalo, each over 2 meters tall and weighing more than a ton, charged collectively. The usually fierce and invincible wild boars were nothing more than paper before a bayonet. Half-meter-long buffalo horns gored the boars, gutting them instantly. In just one clash, the boars were sent flying, crashing violently against the Han tribe's wall behind them. The frozen brick wall, constructed with ice water, could not withstand the relentless, fierce impacts and collapsed with a thunderous crash. Ro Bao and Hui Shan hurriedly retreated to the cave entrance, backing away incessantly until their rear ends nearly blocked the entrance. The remaining dozen or so boars were terrified out of their wits and actually turned around, clambering over their companions' bodies to flee into the walled area. Amid the chaos, over 10 buffalo also charged in. The two sides engaged in a fierce battle upon meeting, instantly demolishing the already damaged wall. 2 horses trembling in the stables suffered as collateral damage. Gored by buffalo horns, they died on the spot. You could only watch helplessly as the wealth you had painstakingly accumulated was destroyed in an instant. Such a prehistoric beastly melee was beyond the influence of individual strength. You could only barely ensure your own and your tribe's survival. Amid the chaotic collisions, the stables collapsed. Over a dozen tethered horses were crushed beneath the fallen structure, then trampled by panicked boars and frenzied buffalo. It was uncertain how many would survive. The sight pained you deeply. Each of those horses had been brought back through your utmost efforts. Outside the wall, over 100 buffalo successfully broke through the encirclement, bypassing the artificial river and fleeing toward the northeast behind the Han tribe's mountain. The scene of the boars being sent flying moments earlier was still vivid in their minds. The wolf pack dared not confront the buffalo head-on and could only nip at the periphery, preying on stragglers. They managed to kill over 20 buffalo. At this point, the alpha wolf issued the order to cease pursuit and began preparing to feast on the spoils. But inside the wall, you were frantic with anxiety. All the horses you had brought back were dead. If you didn't seize this opportunity to gain some advantage now, you would suffer a total loss. Immediately, you summoned all the adults in the tribe, ready to take action. Kill all the bison and wild boars inside the enclosure. These are meats delivered right to our mouths. How could we not take them? In the next moment, 70 to 80 people lined up in sequence at the cave entrance. A flurry of feathers instantly blanketed the wild boars still wreaking havoc inside the enclosure. Amid the thump, thump, thump of feathers piercing flesh. Over 20 beasts fell to the ground on the spot, each riddled with several long feathers. Then, you ordered the elders to lead the children in defending the cave entrance, while the rest followed you as you rushed toward the collapsed section of the enclosure. Dozens of wild boars, half dead from the impact, remained there. Forming ranks, the men stood in the first row for defense, while the women moved behind to deliver the finishing blows, killing all the wild boars before dragging them inside the enclosure. You stepped forward, spear held horizontally, vigilantly eyeing the wolf pack ahead. A dozen men of the Han tribe stood on either side of you, forming a horizontal defensive line with spears raised. Behind them, the women wielded bronze spears, mercilessly finishing off the fallen wild boars. For a moment, the sounds of stabbing thud, thud, the agonized cries of the boars, and the women's bold shouts filled the air. The commotion quickly drew the attention of the wolf pack. Then, the alpha wolf let out a piercing howl, and the wolves feasting on the bison around them paused their actions, turning blood-stained muzzles toward your direction. A new battle was about to erupt. You urgently shouted commands for the tribe to tighten their formation. Anyone who successfully killed a wolf would be rewarded with its pelt and a long spear. Though initially daunted by the sight of hundreds of wolves, the tribespeople now burned with fervor. Gazing at the wolves clamoring ahead, it was as if they saw a mountain of pelts marching toward them. In the next moment, the alpha wolf let out a long howl, and the entire pack gathered into a charging formation, swiftly racing toward Duanchang's position. Duanchang was the first to raise his spear, thrusting it into a ravenous wolf lunging at him. Thud! Blood spurted like an arrow, and the once ferocious wolf slumped limply to the ground. The men on either side completed their first thrusts, leaving over a dozen gray wolf corpses before the spear formation. Inside the enclosure, with the help of Ro Bao and Hui Shan, more than 50 wild boars had been completely wiped out. Freed from their tasks, the women quickly joined the battle, positioning themselves in the gaps between the men in the first row. The remaining women stood in the second row with their long spears, ready to respond to any sudden breaches in the confrontation. In mere moments, over 40 wolf corpses piled up in front of the spear formation. With the first row now doubled by the addition of women, the Han tribe faced no pressure on the frontal battlefield. But creatures as cunning as gray wolves would not resign themselves to slaughter so easily. Unseen by the others, the alpha wolf directed another wolf to flank them from the enclosure, planning a fatal strike against the unsuspecting tribe. Yet this did not escape your watchful eye, fixed on the alpha's movements. Noticing the alpha's sudden pause, you quickly climbed atop the nearby wall, surveying the battlefield from above. On the frontal battlefield at the broken wall, more than 50 gray wolf corpses lay piled like a low barricade blocking the breach. Spotting you on the wall, the alpha wolf feared its diversionary tactic had been exposed. It let out another roar, commanding the frontal charge to alter its attack. Large, elite gray wolves leaped over their fallen comrades, attempting to bypass the first spear row entirely and strike directly at the second. The sudden shift immediately captured your attention. You swiftly ordered the first row to step forward while the second row defended overhead. Just then, a pained howl echoed from the southern wall. Turning to look, your eyes widened in shock. Inside the southern wall, Meat Bun swung his massive trunk, relentlessly striking at the gray wolves attempting to scale the wall. Seeing this, Gray Mountain quickly followed suit, joining Meat Bun in fighting side by side. The front line stabilized. The monkey wolf, realizing the attack was ineffective, had no choice but to halt the wolves' regrouping. Now all hope rested on the flanking squad attempting a sneak attack. Just then, a nimble gray wolf used its companions as a springboard, leaping fiercely and nearly clearing the 3-meter-high wall. But suddenly, an arrow shot out from below, striking the wolf squarely in the neck. This startled the wolves behind it that were preparing to climb. A few more swift arrows followed, shattering the wolves' morale. Seeing no breakthrough on either front, the alpha wolf dared not press the attack further. With a resounding howl, it hastily called for a retreat, turning its attention back to feasting on the wild buffalo carcasses outside. But how could you let them off so easily? With so many horses lost, how could you swallow such an insult? You immediately issued a series of commands. The men were to remain on alert, the women were to drag the slain gray wolves in front of the broken wall inside the enclosure, and a few women were assigned to make torches using firewood and lard. You also instructed the elders to bring out the entire stock of arrows. Within 10 minutes, Meat Bun was loaded with all the usable supplies from the tribe. Gray Mountain carried your sword and bow on his neck, with you riding on his back. Accompanied by 30 adult tribesmen holding torches and spears, you made your way toward the fallen wild buffalo. Approaching one of the carcasses, you first shot and killed a few wolves from over 30 meters away. The remaining gray wolves, too frightened to stay, scattered toward other areas. Seizing the opportunity, you led your people to claim one of the buffalo carcasses. The tribesmen roped the buffalo's head, and Meat Bun and Gray Mountain dragged it back. Trip after trip, you transported the spoils. When exiting the wall, you also brought along a large bundle of firewood. Having witnessed the power of your spears and arrows, and with every tribesman holding a torch, the wolves could only watch in frustration as these humans took their prey. Even the vultures circling the distant buffalo carcasses were shot down by your arrows from afar, all becoming the Han tribe's bounty. Cornered, the wolves had no choice but to turn their attention to the live prey trapped in the ditch. But before they could launch another attack, the entire bank of the artificial river burst into roaring flames, extinguishing the wolves' last hope. Reluctantly, they retreated into the forest. On the riverbank, you and your tribesmen gathered to assess the gains. In the 700-meter-long ditch, there were 36 alpacas, 28 giraffes, 47 wild buffalo of various sizes, 7 or 8 trampled gray wolves, and a young woman with a broken leg. The challenge now was how to extract them all. Getting all the live livestock out would take considerable time, but you remained wary of the wolves lurking in the forest, fearing a surprise attack. So, with Meat Bun and Gray Mountain, you dragged 2 wild boars to the forest's edge as a diversion. After over an hour of effort, all the scattered animal carcasses outside were hauled back inside the wall. By then, it was midnight, and the tribespeople were utterly exhausted. To ensure everyone had the energy to continue working, you had several women slaughter a wild boar to prepare a late-night meal. Each person received a large piece of roasted meat with unlimited meat broth. This was the first fresh roasted meat anyone had eaten in the 3 months since winter began. Smiles lit up every face. The men proudly boasted about how many gray wolves they had killed and what rewards they might earn. By the time the meal ended, dawn was approaching. You divided the more than 70 adults into 4 teams. One team of 10 people took turns standing on the wall, responsible for vigilance and patrols. Another team of 20 was in charge of repairing the wall and enclosures. The remaining 40 or so, carrying tools, followed you outside the wall. First, you assigned 6 people to use bronze shovels and dig an upward-sloping ramp on the north side of the artificial river. This ramp was only wide enough for one large animal to pass through at a time. Once an animal ascended this ramp, it would be impossible for it to turn back. The other 30 or so people, under your direction, built a wooden enclosure. As soon as the livestock below came up, they would enter this narrow wooden passage. You then brought over a temporary furnace, lit charcoal inside it, and inserted 2 bronze hooks to heat them up. With all preparations complete, you had someone bring over a bundle of hay to lure the animals in the river channel. They were directed to this spot. These herbivores, cold and hungry at the time, immediately rose and climbed up the ramp as soon as they saw the bundle of hay. Once they reached the ground, it was straightforward. A few people used ropes to loop around them and directly led them inside the wall, where they were tied up and awaited further arrangements. The last bull to come up had just shown its head on the ramp when several people blocked its path front and back with wooden poles. You immediately took the red-hot bronze hooks and pierced its nose ring. The once ferocious bull instantly turned as docile as a quail, allowing the tribespeople to lead it inside the wall. This work continued until the afternoon before it was finished. Throughout the entire river channel, both the dead and the alive were brought out. After tallying all the gains, 3 types of live livestock totaled 97 heads. Dead wild bulls amounted to 45, wild boars 52, large antlered deer 17, gray wolves 113, and 14 redbirds killed by arrows. Additionally, the blue marlins in the enclosures, unfortunately caught in the crossfire, were all dead. Fortunately, in this great chaos, the father-son enclosure miraculously remained intact. After a busy day, by evening, all the damages had been fully repaired. The 3 walls were heightened by 5 layers of blue bricks to prevent the gray wolves from jumping in from outside again. In the open space within the wall, the crackling sound of burning firewood echoed, accompanied by the laughter and joy of the Han tribe. Over 100 people gathered around the bonfire, working diligently. Some women boasted to others about having previously skinned wolves, offering to personally teach everyone how to do it. Mutong held tools and sawed off the horns of the dead bulls, Gesturing for the boys traded from the Black Rat tribe to watch carefully and later let them try as well. Children held large pieces of roasted meat, singing songs you couldn't understand. They were overjoyed because today food was unlimited. You stood in the center of the open space, watching the tribespeople who had worked tirelessly for a full day and night showing no signs of fatigue, and couldn't help but feel a bit worried. Winter was only about a month away. Once the weather warmed up, what would happen to all the uneaten meat? It would be impossible to preserve. The work of skinning and cutting meat continued late into the night, but the tribespeople, their eyes red with exhaustion, still refused to rest. They were genuinely happy. None of them had ever seen so much meat in their lives. In the end, with no other choice, you had to force them to rest. The next day, as soon as dawn broke, the tribespeople, having rested only half the night, energetically rose to their feet. You had no choice but to reassign tasks. First, you sent Lame, along with Big Mouth and Monkey, to forge 42 bull nose rings. Then, you had the men dig 2 small pits, filling them with wood ash water to treat the more than 200 animal hides. The remaining tribespeople continued processing the meat. Big Tree led a few others in organizing the horns and tendons. Meanwhile, you called over the 3 adult men from the former Bald Peak tribe and asked, "Where did you previously get the rocks you used to trade with us?" Chieftain Rock, the salt was extracted from a small cave within our mountain cavern. Every time we sent 3 or 4-year-old children inside. None of us adults had ever seen it. You answered well. Next time we go searching, you'll lead the way. Considering the wolf packs still lurking in the western forests, you decided to postpone gathering crabs for a while. Now that we knew where the salt mine was, there was no need to worry about a salt shortage. You instructed everyone to bring out all the stored salt and began teaching them how to make cured meat and sausages. Meanwhile, Rat Big and Rat Shaman, along with their party, hurried back to Brew in high spirits. They took your warning very seriously. After discussing it, the 2 leaders decided Rat Big would take a hunting team of 20 to investigate whether things were truly as you described. Rat Shaman would remain in the tribe, directing the women to build a defensive fence wall. They even imitated the Han tribe by using wooden stakes and vines to craft a sturdy gate resembling a horse. The tribespeople used the traded pottery to cook meat soup, chatting quietly as they ate. They wondered how powerful a tribe must be to produce such advanced cooking pots. "If only we could be exchanged to the Han tribe," they whispered. When these words reached Rat Shaman's ears, he didn't lash out. Instead, he closed his eyes, your words echoing in his mind. "Join the Han tribe, and you'll have endless food, limitless animal pelts, and a safe place to live." This thought churned relentlessly in Rat Shaman's heart, making his head spin. Suddenly, he snapped his eyes open, exclaiming with fervor, "Our tribe is smaller than the Han tribe, but why should we join them? That Han chieftain claimed he could make the soil yield endless food. Let's wait and see. What if he's lying?" Just then, Rat Big returned with the hunting team, holding a string of human bone necklaces. Entering the tent, he said, "Look at these. We found them on many frozen corpses in the forest." Rat Shaman nodded repeatedly. It seems what they said is true. For a moment, both fell silent, unsure what to do next. After a long pause, Rat Shaman said to Rat Big, "I've had our people build a wall these past 2 days. If those cannibals really attack us, do you think we can hold them off?" "No. Even children could climb over that fence." Rat Shaman sighed helplessly. "Then post more lookouts and have the women and children make more weapons. If that day comes and we can't win, we'll deal with it then. If only we had more people." Rat Big nodded and stood to arrange the tasks, but suddenly, as if struck by an idea, he said, "I have a thought. A way to get more people for us." Rat Shaman's eyes lit up. "Speak. What is it? Do you remember the Lee tribe guarding the chestnut forest? They must need pottery too. We can use our pottery to trade for people. The Han tribe trades with us. 1 pottery jar for 2 underage boys or 1 adult woman. Let's double that, trade 1 jar to the Lee tribe for 2 women or 4 boys. Then use those people to trade with the Han tribe. We keep any extras for ourselves." Rat Shaman was overjoyed. "So that's how trading works. You're a genius." Even you, far on the west bank of the small river, hadn't anticipated that in this primitive society, the first middleman profiting from price differences had just emerged. Go with this plan. Take people to the Lee tribe immediately. Start by trading the pottery we've obtained." Rat Shaman urged hastily. Ratty quickly acknowledged and hurried out to make the preparations. Meanwhile, back at the Han tribe, thinking about how to deal with the wolf pack, the wolves remained hidden in the forest, refusing to come out. Currently, the tribe's food reserves were only enough for 200 people for a month. Staying in this stalemate was not a solution. After much thought, going out to fight was impossible. Taking too few people would only mean becoming prey. Just then, little Quibing's voice echoed from outside the cave. "Stop being disobedient. Stay still and don't move around." At that moment, Lame and Strong were fitting a nose ring onto a wild ox. The ox, in pain, was becoming restless. Little Kabing, wielding a thorny vine, was swaggeringly whipping the ox's rear, acting all high and mighty. Your eyes suddenly lit up, and an idea struck you. Laughing, you went out to gather thorny vines. These vines were about the thickness of a finger, covered in hard, sharp thorns. Perfect for making deadly traps. First, you used an axe to chop them into sections the length of a thumb. Then, you soaked them in cold water to freeze, letting a layer of ice form over them, encasing the thorns completely. Finally, you coated them thickly with lard. Once the wolves swallowed these, the ice would melt in their stomachs, releasing the thorny vines to pierce their guts. They would surely die. At noon that day, you rode Grey Mountain to the edge of the forest and tossed out some animal entrails to lull the wolves into lowering their guard. By evening, the real deadly gifts were delivered. Thorny vines coated in ice and lard, filling several large baskets. You scattered them along the western edge of the forest. Now, all that was left was to wait for the gray wolves to take the bait. Thinking of their fluffy pelts, you couldn't help but feel eager. After spreading the baskets of thorny vines along the western forest edge, you didn't let your guard down. Quickly, you reminded the tribesmen on watch atop the wall to keep a close eye on the forest's edge, not missing even the slightest movement. Then, dragging your weary body, you returned to the cave for a short rest. With winter nearing its end, tribal affairs were piling up. Spring plowing and rock gathering became the top priorities for the tribe's survival and development. In the past, the tribe had few livestock, only 16 blue marlins with just 2 male marlins suitable for plowing. But compared to the current wild oxen, they were noticeably smaller. The old plows were clearly inadequate. A new style wooden frame with 2 plowshares slowly took shape in your mind. Just as you were fully immersed in designing the new bronze plow, a certain sly character, always seeking personal gain, embarked on his business journey. The Mi tribe had over 230 people, with vast chestnut forests in their territory. Quite a sight. Though chestnuts couldn't serve as a staple food to fill everyone's belly at every meal, during hunting off-seasons, they could stave off hunger, preventing starvation. The Mi tribe lived relatively stable lives. Their settlement was south of the Black Rat tribe, not too far but not too close. A day's walk away. This distance was typical among primitive tribes. After all, in an era without transportation, relying solely on 2 legs to travel, one had to return to their camp before sunset. At night, the wilderness teemed with fierce beasts, far more dangerous than imagined. Rat Leader, with 10 strong men, marched for a full day and arrived at the Li tribe just as they were preparing dinner. The Li tribe's chief, Maoli, and shaman, Xiao Jiantang, immediately grew irritated. Just 3 months after the harsh winter, every tribe was struggling with dwindling food reserves, barely scraping by. A visit at this time was clearly just for a free meal. Maoli's face darkened on the spot, his attitude stern, offering no welcome. Rat Leader understood perfectly well that he wasn't welcome. Hastily, he put on a smiling face, explaining that he hadn't come for a meal. He then ordered his subordinate Mali to bring out some food. Only then did Mao Li's expression soften a little. He led them into the tribe's residential area. There were over a dozen semi-underground earthen houses. Their appearance somewhat resembled the Han tribe's brick kilns. Half of them were buried underground. The surface was covered with a hemispherical dome made of branches. After plastering with mud, a smoke hole was left on top. As soon as Shu De entered the house, his gaze was drawn to the central fire pit. He saw the Li tribe members roasting chestnuts and dried meat. He felt reassured. He was about to recommend his own pottery pot. But he met Mao Li's gloomy face. Mao Li was displeased. He felt that this man had just entered and was already staring at the food. He must have ill intentions. Shu De was not annoyed. Calmly and composedly, he had his subordinate present the pottery pot and dried meat. He proceeded to prepare dinner by the fire pit as if it were his own. Seeing that they had indeed brought their own food, and even had exquisite pottery, Mao Li's expression finally cleared completely. His attention was entirely captured by the pottery pot. Especially when he heard that using this pot to cook meat could both ward off the cold and save food, he became interested. Although Xu De boasted extravagantly, Mao Li didn't take it too seriously. But currently, the tribe was short on food, so the aspect of saving food was crucial. However, as soon as they discussed the price, the two immediately fell into a dispute. Xu De had only brought the pottery pot, without water jars or pottery bowls for reference. Mao Li couldn't estimate the value of the pottery pot. He felt Xu De was asking for an exorbitant price. After some haggling, the two settled on one pottery pot in exchange for 3 boys, or 1 woman plus 1 boy. Xu De was calculating meticulously, intent on expanding the tribe's combat power. He only wanted boys, despising women for their weaker strength or for being a burden to the team. Although these boys were only 10 to 11 years old, by tribal calculations, they would reach adulthood in another year or 2. With a little training, they could go into battle and kill enemies. Mao Li was unhappy in his heart. Giving away so many young laborers at once. Even though the tribe had a large population, it couldn't withstand such depletion. So the two agreed that this would be the only time. Future trades would not be allowed to take only boys. Xu De nodded repeatedly, readily agreeing. The next morning, Xu De left behind 5 pottery pots, and with the 15 boys obtained from the trade and his subordinates, returned to the Black Shu tribe satisfied. With winter nearly over, he was still thinking about the trade with the Han tribe. Anxiously, he began planning the next steps. Meanwhile, the Han tribe was bustling with excitement. After the thrilling tribal defense battle, every tribesperson had performed valiantly. The rewards promised before the battle were now to be distributed. Wolf pelts were thick and warm, and every adult man and woman in the tribe received one. Although the red ornaments were in short supply, you were not stingy. The men were awarded specially made copper ornaments, designed in the shape of majestic wolf heads. Though small in size, they held great significance, symbolizing meritorious service in battle, like medals. Everyone cherished them and wore them with pride. The women received exquisite copper ornaments as well, and each was beaming with joy. What excited the tribespeople the most was that everyone received a longbow. They had long witnessed the power of the longbow up close. Close-range hunting resulted in high casualties. With the longbow's long-range attacks, they were much safer. The number of arrows one could carry far exceeded that of spears, greatly increasing efficiency in killing enemies.